Commissioner Shamir Barron,
Here.
Commissioner Chapin,
Here.
Commissioner Chen,
Yeah.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Here.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Here.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson. Commissioner Jefferson, you're muted.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Lutfi
Here.
and Commissioner Holford Smith.
Here.
Okay, we're all set.
Great. Thank you, Rich. And good morning and welcome to the May 4th public hearing and public meeting. Today, we will start the day with our public meeting agenda, which will include a proposal to calendar a property for consideration as an individual landmark, and that will be followed by 3 revised proposals for work at designated properties. These 3 applications have all had public hearings, and the commissioners have listened to testimony and given comments, and the applicants will be presenting revised proposals in response to those comments. The public meeting will be followed by a public hearing for new applications on work at designated properties. And this public hearing and meeting is being held via Zoom and live streamed on YouTube. If you would like to watch the proceedings, please visit our YouTube channel to watch the live stream. If you would like to testify on any of the hearing items this afternoon, please join the meeting at the estimated time for that item as shown on our hearing agenda. And our hearing agenda can be found on our website. And so with that, I will turn it over to our Director of Research, Kate Lemos-McHale, to present the item that we're proposing to calendar.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Item number 1.
Kate, I apologize. Could you hold for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
I just want to make sure. Okay, I apologize, Kate. It does look like it's working.
Okay, great. Item number 1 this morning on the research agenda is LP 2653, the Kimlau War Memorial, located within Kimlau Square, Chatham Square, and East Broadway in Manhattan, Block 117, Lot 100 in part. Item proposed for the Commission's calendar is a granite ceremonial gateway designed by architect Poi Gum Lee and dedicated in 1962 as a memorial to Chinese American war casualties. Designed by architect Poi Gum Lee and dedicated in 1962, the Kimlau War Memorial is a ceremonial gateway located in Kimlau Square at the intersection of Chatham Square, Oliver Street, and East Broadway in Manhattan. The arch, sponsored by the American Legion, honors Chinese American soldiers who died while serving in the United States military. The memorial is named after Second Lieutenant Benjamin Ralph Kimlau, a Chinese American pilot who died while attacking Japanese military installations in the South Pacific. The arch and its pair of benches that flank it consist of a unique blend of traditional Chinese architectural forms with a streamlined mid-century modern aesthetic that has served as an important community monument for nearly 50 years. The Kimlau War Memorial is located within Kimlau Square, which is in Chatham Square. And this was identified as part of a broader study of Chinatown as very important as a public monument and symbol of Chinese contributions to US history, Chinese American contributions. Its prominent location at the intersection of Chatham Square, Mott Street, and East Broadway is indicated by the star on this map. And this is a closer view of Chinatown, which has an incredible layered history. There are several New York City landmarks in Chinatown, but none are designated primarily because of their significance to Chinese American heritage. The Kimlau War Memorial would be the first New York City landmark that specifically recognizes Chinese American history and culture. Until the 1870s, few Chinese immigrants settled in New York City. The majority of immigration from China in the 1840s was related to railroad construction in the western part of the country. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, coupled with an outbreak of anti-Chinese violence in the West, caused many immigrants to relocate to New York City, and they settled in the vicinity of Mott, Pell, and Doyer Streets at the northwest side of Chatham Square. As early as the 1880s, Chinese shops faced the square. Though the growth of Chinatown slowed after the 1882 Exclusion Act, the community built complex organizations and its restaurants became attractions to New Yorkers and tourists by the turn of the century. After World War II, exclusionary laws were repealed and immigration resumed, and then grew rapidly after 1965. By that time, Chinatown covered several blocks and continued to grow in the next decades. Located in Lower Manhattan between the Manhattan and Brooklyn bridges, the area around Chatham Square was developed early in New York City's history, and it has held a significant central location in Chinatown since the late 19th century. The irregular street grid forms this intersection of multiple streets with an asymmetrical plaza. The street configuration has changed over time, most recently in 1999, when St. James Place was closed off and the square was expanded into the former roadway to create the current footprint of Kimlau Square. Chatham Square functioned as an open-air livestock market until the 1820s. In the mid-19th century, it was part of the Five Points neighborhood and was known for its infamous saloons and tattoo parlors. By 1880, Chatham Square was an important junction of the 2nd and 3rd Avenue elevated train lines. Until the middle of the 20th century, it was cast in perpetual shadow by the elevated train lines that intersected overhead. In 1955, the elevated tracks were replaced by the below-grade subway, bringing daylight into the area for the first time in 75 years. In 1961, a small crescent of land was laid out in Chatham Square as a public place named Kimlau Square after Second Lieutenant Benjamin Ralph Kimlau. Dedicated in 1962, the memorial erected there was a gift of the Lieutenant B.R. Kimlau Chinese Memorial Post 1291 of the American Legion. The dedication of the monument was of great significance to the Chinese American community and veterans in particular. The dedication ceremony drew large crowds seen in the newspaper photo on the right. The American Legion is a national organization formed by World War I veterans with a mission to care for disabled and sick veterans. It established hospitals and sponsored the creation of the Veterans Administration. There are currently more than 15,000 local American Legion posts. The Lieutenant Kimlau post is the largest in New York City. Both the post and the War Memorial are named for Benjamin Ralph Kimlau, who moved to Chinatown with his family as a teenager and lived here until he left to travel in China. Upon his return to the United States, he enrolled at the Pennsylvania Military College, and we're still doing research on him and understand that he is one of the first Chinese American students to study there and may have been president of his class. He graduated in 1942. He died while attacking Chinese military installations in the South Pacific in World War II at the age of 26. The Kimlau War Memorial was designed by the Chinese American architect Poi Gum Lee. Born at 13 Mott Street in 1900, he was educated at Pratt, MIT, and Columbia. He worked for a time in Shanghai, China, in the 1930s and became prominent there before returning to New York. He later served as supervising architect and project advisor for the New York City Housing Authority. He also had his own practice in Chinatown that blended Art Deco, modernism, and Chinese vernacular forms. Poi Ji Lee may be the most important example at that time of a Chinese American architect working in Chinatown, designing buildings for the Chinese community. In addition to the War Memorial, Poi Ji Lee's work in Chinatown includes the Chinese Merchants Association building at 184 Canal Street, that's shown on the left, the Wong Family Association building at 24 Bowery, which has been altered, and numerous storefront alterations in Chinatown from the 50s and 60s. He also designed the Pagoda Theater, shown here on the right, which has been demolished but was located on East Broadway. These are early renderings of the memorial arch from the Parks Department archives. The Kimlau War Memorial is a granite ceremonial gateway, or pailo, with a peaked roof. Both the arch and the two benches flanking it blend traditional Chinese architectural forms with a streamlined modern aesthetic. The memorial's Asian-inspired architecture reflects the character of the area in the center of Manhattan's Chinese community. A Pai Lo, or Pai Fong, is a traditional gateway in Chinese architecture that evolved from Buddhist forms in India. Traditionally composed of wood and stone with elaborately tiled upturned roofs, they're decorative gateways into villages or cemeteries. Contemporary examples are often erected as memorials, such as this one. The early renderings on the previous slide exhibited a stronger traditional Chinese architectural influence, but as Li's design evolved, some of these features were simplified and made more modern, and still others were eliminated completely. Among the features that changed over time in the design are the location, relocation and reduction in size of the American Legion medallion and reconfigured benches. Other decorative elements such as the brackets and roof tiles were scaled back, resulting in a much simplified modernist design. The final design of the Kimlau War Memorial consists of a Chinese modern gateway with a peaked roof, flanked by benches with an oblong footprint. It retains Chinese architectural features such as incised joints that echo the design of a vernacular Chinese tile roof, reflecting the character of the area, but also demonstrating a modern aesthetic. Inscribed at the top of the arch in both Chinese and English are the words, "In memory of the Americans of Chinese ancestry who lost their lives in defense of freedom and democracy." In 1999, the monument was restored in conjunction with the renovation of Chatham Square. The footprint of the park was expanded by the closure of St. James Place, once the southeast boundary of the square. And the reconfiguration of the grid not only expanded the park, but it addressed some of the dangerous pedestrian conditions that had been present in this area. And new pavers were installed around the monument, distinct from the paving through the rest of the square. In 2001, the Parks Department's first historical signage in Chinese was installed at the arch. The tax lot, as you can see here, retains the irregular shape from the original island that the monument was placed on. And the square that currently exists dates really to 1999. So the proposed landmark site is the monument itself, which includes the gateway and the benches. The Kimlau War Memorial is a place for remembrance and reflection, situated in a prominent location in Chinatown. It's significant as a public monument dedicated to the contributions of Chinese Americans to American history. It's designed by the architect Poi Li, and its prominence as a symbolic gateway to Chinatown. The arch and benches retain a high degree of integrity to their original design and construction. Kimlau Square is under the care of the New York City Parks Department, and a restoration of the memorial is currently being planned. The research department recommends the commission vote to calendar this monument for consideration as an individual landmark. Lisa Buckley from the research staff is working on this, and she's here with me to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Commissioners, do we have any questions for Kate and Lisa?
I guess I do.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I'm thrilled by the whole idea of this, but I was intrigued. Within 1 year, the design went from quite a florid to quite a more subdued rendition. And I'm just wondering if we know what motivated that. As an architect, I can imagine what might have motivated it: money, budget, et cetera, but I just wondered if it was more than that, if the architect, if there's any record of the architect having second thoughts and maybe wanting to be more modern.
This is something we're still researching to really understand that, because we also find it very interesting. I think one of the things we have started to learn is Poi Li did work a lot in modernism, but he incorporated traditional Chinese design. But there's also, in terms of representation, the more traditional features tend to relate more to Chinese nationalism, and then the modernism tends to relate a little more to the communism coming in. So we're trying to understand if that had to do with the changes here, or if it was really more just the modern aesthetic. But it's an interesting history, I think.
Well, no matter what the answer is, I think it's an intriguing story, and it ought to be a part of the record.
For sure.
If that record exists.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I just have to thank the commission and Kate and her research staff for bringing this important item for discussion. Number one, I normally would have been recused from an item, and I thank Mark for clarifying with Parks Department that there's no conflict interest here. And I just want to bring cover to answer Fred's question. Is an excellent one. My understanding, Port Gumley is more of a modernist camp. He did a reinterpretation. If you look at his Merchants Building, and he also did Kate, you may not notice, he also did a design competition for the Doyer Street American Legion headquarters, which is currently the post office, which is also named after another historical figure, Mabel Lee, who who led the women's suffrage movement, even though after passage of the amendment, she cannot vote herself, and devoted her entire life to Doyer Street and Pell Street. There's a church there that still belongs to her. But I just want to alert the commission that I'm glad that the consideration is only for the landmark of the memorial itself. This is indeed a place of remembrance and reflection, because the American Legionnaires always march down Mott Street and they congregate here. And also on Memorial Day, as well as on 9/11. So this is a very important, solemn, and so this is an important guiding place. And you are absolutely correct. For those of you that doubt the future of Chinatown, this is also the future of the 2nd Avenue subway entrance in Chinatown. So God knows the 1919 project of Avenue subway eventually will get here. And I asked the future commissioners to take a look at this thing long after I'm gone, that there had to be a readjustment, because currently my understanding is there's structural instability underneath. That's what's causing the two horizontal cracks. If you see the top of the band, right underneath that horizontal and temperature, the two cracks there. And they believe initially it was underneath the instability under the ground. And DOT a few years back was going to allocate, I think, something like $50 million to do the recirculation of this area, because this is the mini Columbus Circle of Lower East Side. 7 streets come together, the Mott Street, Broadway, Bowery, St. James, all convert in this location. So I would love for for the record to show that this is a very important location for the future as well. Not only at this moment of hate that led to the creation of Chinatown, and then as well as the current harassment and xenophobia of faith. So I'm glad the commission is bringing this to the thing, but there's a lot of research to be done. I'm glad to hear about the Virginia school, and so I hope you find out more.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldblum.
Thank you. Did the research show any specifics related to the placement of the benches and of the ground or hardscape plantings, etc.? Are we, if this is being renovated, are we working with parks in terms of a site plan and positioning?
I will answer that, and Lisa, jump in if I miss anything. But I think what we found are much what was shown in this presentation, which shows the original design had the benches turned so they were perpendicular to the arch. And that
right,
changed.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and that changed as the design was finalized. They're still in that same position, so they haven't moved since they were built, but the paving changed around them in the 90s.
So it was always in a paved setting, and the design, as far as we know, was linear, and not perpendicular for the benches.
Right, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Holford-Smith, please go ahead.
I was curious, and I was looking on Google Maps as well. Why the barricades around the monument and the benches? Is it, what is the concern about keeping people out? Do we know?
Well,
I
I
think
think go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I think they are, because they are, as Wellington mentioned, there are some cracks. So the Parks Department is embarking on a restoration plan. And so right now, I think they're doing their survey work, and that will lead to a plan. So we'll be working closely with them as they're developing that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, so I don't see any other questions. And as Kate said, we have several landmarks in Chinatown. And while these landmarks play an important role in Chinatown, if we moved ahead with this item, it would be the first designation to specifically recognize Chinese history and Chinese American history here. So I can't think of a better time to consider a property that's significant to the Chinese community here. And I hope that action here would set the stage for considering more in the future. So I would love to make a motion to calendar this item for consideration as a New York City landmark. Wellington, would you like to second my motion?
I'll be delighted to second it.
Okay, thank you. So all we have to do is call a vote. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, so the item is calendared, and we will have a public hearing on June 1st on this item. So thank you all. And now we'll move to the Preservation Department agenda.
Okay, thanks, Sarah, and good morning, commissioners and the public. We will take just a brief pause to switch staff and then begin shortly. Okay, and as noted, we will start with the Preservation Department's public meeting agenda this morning. The first item is item number 1, LPC 21-06470, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 645, Lot 38, 406 West 13th Street in the Gansevoort Market Historic District. This is a market building designed by Abraham L. Seiden and built in 1950, altered in 1988. And the application is to replace the front facade, construct a rear addition, and remove a portion of the floor. This was last presented at the public hearing of April 6, 2021, and no action was taken at that time. The staff will do a brief introduction before the applicant continues with the remainder of the presentation after we open the proceedings.
Okay, why don't we actually first go ahead and open the proceedings just so that's done. So I'm actually unmuting all of you again. Just take care of that. Okay, Commissioner Chapin, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
Motion to open the proceedings.
And Commissioner Goldblum, would you second that motion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we'll begin.
Good morning, Maggie for your preservation staff. This proposal here is for 406 West 13th Street, was last presented to you at a public hearing and meeting on April 6th. The proposal was to replace and redesign the front facade, construct a rear addition, and remove a large portion of an interior floor directly behind the facade, separating the first and second floors. At that time, most of the commissioners indicated support for the addition and the removal of the section of the floor, as well as for the replacing the existing front facade of the building. But some expressed concern about the design of the proposed facade, finding that the upper portion needed to be more location specific, with a stronger connection to the surrounding streetscapes and the historic industrial character of the district. In particular, several of the commissioners specifically questioned the finish of the brickwork. The applicant have modified the design, and the applicant, Andrew McGee from Format Architecture, would like to explain this further about the changes.
Good morning. Let me just get my slides back to the beginning here.
Hey, Andrew, I have given you control of the screen. You just need to click on it, and then you may begin.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay. Good morning. My name is Andrew McGee, as previously said, principal at Format Architecture Office. We're the architect for the project, and I'll be presenting the proposed design revisions to you all today. So to begin, we included a brief refresh on the site context for everyone's orientation. The site is located on the south side of West 13th Street, between 9th Avenue and Washington Street. With a district frontage of just under 19 feet, it is the smallest lot on the block and one of the smallest lots in the entire historic district. As Maggie mentioned in the preamble, and Chair Carroll's summary of the feedback from the April 6th hearing for this presentation was that there needs to be more reference to the historic layers in the district, and how can the design be more informed by its immediate context and its specific history. So with that in mind, we researched further the previous observable conditions present at 406 West 13th, and color text photographs from the 1980s on the lower left show what appear to be actually a lighter tan brick as the original facade for 402, 404, and 406, as opposed to the current red brick condition that's present today. So views looking down 13th Street show a number of existing buildings in the immediate vicinity of 406 that utilize an unpainted tan brick for their facade, which gives, I think, further contextual relevance to this consideration. Additionally, 410 West 14th Street, which is shown on the far right, which is just 1 block away from our project, we think provides a relevant neighborhood reference for building scale, proportions, and upper level brick ornamentation that influenced aspects of our original design presented on April 6th, which is shown on the left, but we think is further strengthened by our proposed revisions shown in the center, inclusive of an unpainted tan brick now, as well as some other detail adjustments that I'll explain further in a moment. And then, so zooming in, the middle image on the top is actually a zoom in of 410 West 14th Street. And the image on the upper left is of the Market Building at 859 Washington Street, which is at the end of our block. And we felt that these were 2 prominent examples of some of this ornamental brick spandrel and frames within the neighborhood that we were using as precedents in the original presentation. But just to reiterate that the proposed brick screen on our project, we feel is a modern interpretation of some of this traditional ornamental treatment of the brick. So on the left is shown the design as presented on April 6th with a painted dark gray brick. We took to heart some of the specific vocabulary that Commissioner Jefferson used when noting how to improve the reading of the building as appropriate, including roughness, relief, and richness. The proposed revisions on the right add depth, texture, and contrast to the design that we believe speaks more intimately with some of these guiding features of the district and the building's history and context. Zooming in, 3 key brick detail adjustments shown on the right are noted. A revised cornice has been expanded to add some visual weight to the top of the building compared to the more minimal cornice from the original design. Brick courses at the building's edge have been set back slightly to create a shadow line between the neighboring buildings, which is a detail that we found was common to several buildings on 13th Street. And then lastly, an articulated brick frame around the brick screen area stands slightly proud of the surrounding brick, which we feel improves the legibility and reading of depth of that area. And it's also worth noting that Commissioner Goldblum, in the April 6th hearing, you had rightly, I think, spoken of juxtaposition as a defining aspect of the district between existing buildings, between industrial buildings, and between more modern projects. And so so we still believe strongly that maintaining the small scale of this building when its neighbors have grown and changed dramatically in scale represents a key aspect of that juxtaposition for this project's narrow frontage. This preserved small scale combined with these revised brick details and tone, we submit speaks more articulately with the context of 13th Street, with the neighborhood at large, and with the specific history of this property. Here again is the revised upper volume brickwork details and elevation, showing the extended cornice, express frame, and shadow lines at the lot edge, as well as the tan brick in context. And finally, a view of the existing front facade condition on the left and the revised proposed facade on the right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Any questions for the applicant? Okay. We did receive, I know, a letter in advance. Rich, do you want to just summarize the materials that were submitted in advance and shared with the commissioners?
Yes, we did receive a letter from Village Preservation remaining in opposition to the application.
Okay. All right. Oh, Commissioner Chen, please go ahead.
I'm just wondering, is it me or is it the color of the rendering? Is it compared to the last one, this one, the color seems to be stronger and it popping out to calling more attention to the centerpiece. It could be just my due to the rendering, or is it the is it the very close to the reality?
Well, I think I'll let the applicant answer, but I think that they presented that they looked at, well, the brick that is on the existing facade is not the brick that was there at the time of designation. It was a lighter color. And then they looked at some other commercial buildings of the early 20th century and found some other buff brick. And Mr. McGee, why don't you add to that? I don't want to speak for you.
Oh yeah, certainly. And Commissioner Chen, I think that's a good question. I mean, certainly the darker painted brick. I think there was a, I mean, the word that was used on the April 6th hearing was kind of a flatness to the reading of the facade, which certainly would make maybe more subtle the reading then of the screen area. So I think what we were maybe excited about in finding some of those older photographs of the lighter colored brick and just looking at the street and thinking about the context more was it does draw a little bit more attention to that element, but I think that that contrast and that juxtaposition, if you will, is interesting to us, and we feel like maybe does speak to some of the details that we're trying to draw out a little bit more with the lighter brick.
Thank you. I was just hoping that the final selection of the brick may be closer in the darker tone to the building to the right, so that's sort of more blend in. That was my point of questioning.
I see.
Okay. And, you know, I think that the applicant could continue to work with staff to look at final samples if you're comfortable with the sort of the general idea of a buff brick.
We would certainly do that. Yeah.
And would think about how to fit it into the streetscape. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so I think we'll move to our discussion. And, you know, I have thought a lot about this from the last public hearing. At the last hearing, there were about, I think, five of us who were supportive with some minor adjustments, but others had concerns about what they felt were sort of missing characteristics of the district, and specifically talking about it being too designed or too cleaned up and not gritty enough. And so in trying to think about how to articulate this in a appropriateness language, I spent a lot of time reading the designation report to understand what the commission identified as significant characteristics and looked at our past regulatory history in the district as well. And so the designation report says, and I know we've talked a lot about how the report characterizes this district as a district that had many periods of development that brought in different uses, and those waves of different uses resulted in significant sort of alterations to the buildings over time. But the report, specifically says that the district is distinctive for its long history of continuous varied use as a place of dwelling, industry, and commerce, and its urban layout, and that most of the buildings date from 1840 to 1930, with the bulk of them being between 1880 and 1920. And they include row houses, tenements, flats buildings, store and loft buildings, and warehouses and low-rise market buildings. And it says that all these buildings were built in popular revival styles of the time, even if they were vernacular or more utilitarian. The report also goes on to say that at the time of designation, the Gansevoort Market Historic District was a vibrant neighborhood of remaining meatpackers, high-end retail commerce, restaurants, offices, clubs, galleries, and apartments, and that it retained a strong and integral sense of place as a market district due to its distinctive streetscapes, which is the street grid and the paving, the metal canopies, the notable buildings, both purpose-built and those adapted over the years for market use. And in fact, it goes on to great extent to talk about the notable architects and the styles that were used. And it doesn't really ever talk about the grittiness that may have occurred as a result of the changes that facilitated these waves of adaptive reuse. So, and in fact, at the time of designation, the commissioner's discussion, they discussed with enthusiasm the changes to high-end retail restaurants and the fashion industry as the new life of these buildings, and therefore sort of set the stage for more creative approvals that continue the historic pattern of change that resulted from those waves of adaptive use. So I think that the approvals the commission has made over the years in the district have been creative and have made the historic district exciting and dynamic, but have also been grounded in appropriateness. So with all of this in my mind, I sort of thought about where I was. The building is identified as a non-contributing building in the report, one of only 12 buildings out of 104 buildings in the district that are identified as non-contributing. I agree with the commission's determination in 2003. The building was extended to the street wall in the front and also extended at the back in addition to being lowered. So it doesn't retain any fabric that warrants reflecting its original appearance as a row house at this point. I also noted that the building was converted to market use after the major period of market development, and that the majority of the other market buildings in this district were given a style such as arts and crafts, neo-Grec, Art Deco, modern, and even the more utilitarian market buildings have some distinctive features like corbelled cornices or crenellated parapets or panels in the brick or and canopies, or that they're part of a larger group of utilitarian buildings that give it more presence and prominence in the streetscape. So I think that this building doesn't have any of those distinguishing features. And finally, I also really looked at the buildings on this street. And unlike some of the more utilitarian streets like Gansevoort and Washington streets, this street is lined with buildings that have a range of styles, including Queen Anne, arts and crafts, neo-Renaissance, neo-Romanesque, neoclassical, modern, and international styles. So even with the simplest buildings, again, here there are features like stone lintels and sills and corbelling and paneling. So I really think that the loss of this facade and the replacement with a new facade is appropriate and will not diminish this street or this historic district. And then in thinking about the design, the report says that the visual cohesion in this district is provided by streetscapes that have a predominance of brick as a facade material, sort of 1 to 6 story scale, the presence of buildings designed by the same architects, a number of them prominent, and again, metal canopies. And again, the Belgian block paving. So in terms of the design that's proposed today, I think the proposed facade looks directly to a historic commercial building of the same size that represents the commercial styles in the district. It features buffed brick that relates to the predominance of brick facades, a large frame articulated by patterned brick, which I think is really consistent with even the simplest buildings that have evidence of patterned brick. and a glazed storefront, which reflects the commercial character of the historic district, which featured buildings with big, large storefronts historically, or big openings for the meatpacking. And so the big, large openings are found in all of the mixed-use buildings and the market buildings in the district. So I think that in all respects, this proposal, when you sort of break it down into its parts, I find it to be appropriate and consistent with the materiality and the vocabulary in the district. So that was my thought, and I know some of you had concerns, and I wonder if, with the revisions that you've seen today, if those have addressed some of your concerns. I'm going to start, actually, Fred, with you. I think you last time were comfortable with the removal of the facade and with the new facade, but thought that a lighter brick could be explored. So I think that the changes probably fit pretty closely with what you were thinking last time, but I'll let you go ahead.
All that's true, and I'll say it again in just a second, but I want to thank you, Sarah, for such a complete understanding of this district and the designation report and what really is in it, and how interpreting that designation report over time has led to the really polyglot nature of this district. So thank you for a really full description of that. Yes, I was not in opposition at all last time. I thought that the brick might be lightened. I think the architect has taken that very seriously to heart and has come back with, I'm thankful, not a dramatically changed design. I thought the last design was great, but the brick now relates a little bit more to the color of brick in the district. And I think this tiny little building, in order to not completely disappear from view the way it almost does now, it's from just a design point of view, it's appropriate that such a little building could make a bold statement with the large square and the patterned brick in it. So one way of saying I supported it before, but I think it's gotten better, and I support it now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lutfi?
I agree. I thought it was a good project before. I think the changes in the brick color have even improved it, and I can support it.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
I can support it.
Okay. Commissioner Gustafson, I know you had concerns about sort of losing some of the existing fabric.
Yeah, I'm having heard your soliloquy. I find that it is appropriate, this design. I will note, however, that I imagine that everybody who was on the commission and wrote that report must be much, much younger than me, because I can't even imagine looking at this district and not mentioning the word gritty, but so be it.
Okay, Commissioner Shamir Barron.
I'm in agreement. I think that the color really improves. I think that I was actually in favor in general of it in the first place, but thought that there might be a little bit more articulation of something having to do with the corbelling, and really the color makes it so much better. But I think what's interesting about it is that it really retains, you know, the kind of the size. It's the size of the former building, and I think in that sense doesn't really sort of. There's not a lot of loss. For some reason, it's still somehow intact. So I'm in support.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith, I think you also had concerns about it being sort of too cleaned up, and maybe these changes have helped to fit it into the district better for you.
Yeah, I think they have. I think part of the problem was that the painted finish that made it very flat and sort of undistinguished or indistinguished. And I think the change to the natural buff material, brick material, and the additional detailing has really helped give it some articulation that gives it some texture to help add to the, so I can support it.
Okay, great. Commissioner Chapin?
I was one of those that supported it initially, or could have, but I think these changes have served to make it more appropriate to the district, so I can support it.
Okay. Commissioner Goldblum?
I agree. I think that the choice of the brick was a good one. The simple change in color really does draw it into its streetscape significantly. It's a very site-specific kind of color that you really do see a lot in that neighborhood. And I think the little detail changes that they've made, the reveal at the sides, the framing of the box, it kind of starts to have a little bit more of a dialogue with historical detailing that makes it, once again, not just a perfectly nice design, which I felt it was in the first place, but a nice design that is talking to its neighbors. So to that extent, I think it works. And I also, like Fred, I wanted to thank you for your discourse. I think it's good for us to have modeled for us a procedure in how we should be analyzing landmarks and applications. So thank you very much, and more the better.
Thank you. Commissioner Devonshire.
The brick change has done it for me. I find it very satisfactory.
Commissioner Chen.
I agree. I think it's the materiality and as well as the pattern. I think the detailing make reference homage to the past. There's a reference to the past as well as the not forgetting. So
Great, thank you. And I do think that the changes that came out of your concerns really did make all of the difference, and the applicant, really then sort of looked right to the models in the neighborhood, and that led to this color change and the enhancement of the details, which, while subtle, I think together really do speak better to the district. So thank you all for your comments. Okay, Commissioner Lutfi, would you make the motion?
Sure. In the matter of docket 21-06470, 406 West 13th Street, Gansevoort Market Historic District. Market building designed by Abraham L. Seiden, built in 1950 and altered in 1988. The application is to replace the front facade, construct a rear addition, and remove a portion of the floor. I note that the building was originally constructed as a row house in 1846 and altered to a market building in the mid-20th century. And while the building typology and evolution are typical of buildings in this historic district, in 1955, the building was reduced in height, the front facade was moved forward, and a rear addition was added, and therefore the building contains no exterior architectural or historic features that contribute to the special character of the Gansevoort Market Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the proposed redesign at this altered building will be consistent with the evolving developmental history of this building and will not eliminate or damage any significant architectural or historic features. That the building is a uniquely small structure within the streetscape, and that this singular design, featuring a creative abstraction of historic features found within the historic district, will be harmonious with the surrounding context. That the proposed materials and finishes of the brickwork and painted material infill will be in keeping with materials and finishes found on buildings throughout the streetscape and historic district. That the proportions of the ground floor glazing and the open work brick screen above will relate well in placement and size to the floor to ceiling heights and windows at neighboring buildings. That the simple repetitive pattern of the open work brick screen will be compatible with the industrial character of the historic district and will reference in a contemporary way the historic pattern brickwork found at buildings throughout the historic district. It's a lot to say for a very little project. The slide of the screen and brickwork At the screen frame and parapet will be evocative of decorative brickwork found throughout the historic district. At the large expanse of simply detailed glazed infill at the ground floor will be evocative of the openness of historic market stalls and loading docks at the base of market buildings and warehouses throughout the historic district. That the metal framing at the ground floor will recall in a contemporary way cast iron piers historically found at buildings within the historic district. That the removal of the front portion of the second floor plate, creating a two-story interior space, will be compatible with the redesign of the front facade and will be difficult to discern from the street. That the rear addition will not be visible from a public thoroughfare. That the rear of the building contains no significant architectural features. And the rear addition will maintain the footprint of the existing building and will not overwhelm the scale of the building or adjacent buildings on the block. That the addition will feature a materials palette and solid to void ratio in keeping with secondary facades of buildings throughout the historic district, and that the work will not detract from the special architectural character of the building or the streetscape.
Thank you. Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, Rich, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
and Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
Okay, with 11 in favor and none opposed, the motion carries.
Thank you. So that's approved. And we'll move to the next item.
The next item is public meeting item number 2, LPC 21-03913, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1322, lot 107, 211 East 48th Street, the Lescaze House, individual landmark. This is a modern style residence and office building designed by William Lescaze and built in 1933 to 34. The application is to extend and reconstruct the rear facade, excavate the rear yard, construct a rooftop addition, and extend chimneys. This was last presented at the public hearing of January 19th, 2021. No action was taken at that time. And again, after we open the proceedings, the staff will do a brief introduction followed by the applicant presenting the revisions to the proposal.
Okay, great. So Commissioner Lutfi, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion?
I so second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so the proceedings are open and the staff and the applicant may begin.
Good morning, Commissioners. Elizabeth Fagan, Preservation staff. At the public hearing of January 19th, 2021, the Commissioners reviewed a proposal to construct a rooftop addition, extend chimneys, extend and reconstruct the rear facade, excavate a portion of the rear yard, and replace rear facade windows. The applicants have returned with a revised scope, which now omits the extension and reconstruction of the rear facade, as well as the excavation of the rear yard. The scope that the Commissioners are reviewing today is only for the rooftop addition, and other minor work at the rear will be reviewed at staff level. Regarding the rooftop addition, some Commissioners felt that an addition could be appropriate here, given possible evidence that an addition was originally planned but not built, while other Commissioners felt that the spirit of Lescaze's design could accept an addition regardless. However, most Commissioners at the time felt that the addition was too large and too visible in connection with this individual landmark. The consensus was that the addition should be reduced in size and made less visible, and that the design of the addition should better relate to or be in conversation with the building in some way. And the applicants have returned with a revised rooftop addition proposal and are here to walk you through the design.
Alex, you should have control of the presentation. Just click on the screen and state your name for the record, and you may begin.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Carroll, Commissioners. My name is Alex Nishikovsky, along with Wayne Tourette. We are of the Tourette Collaborative, and we represent the owner of 211 East 48th Street, the William Lescaze house. So as was noted, the previous scope involved a rooftop addition, reconstruction and extension of the rear facade, and lowering of the rear yard. Since that time, we've reviewed both the Commission's comments, reviewed with staff and with the owner, and we've come back with a significantly scaled back proposal focused mainly on a smaller rooftop addition. To walk you through briefly on the context, property is located on the north side of 48th Street between 3rd and 4th Avenue. There's a large office tower at 3rd Avenue with a setback plaza, which presents a significant view corridor from the west. The townhouse is part of a row of historic homes constructed in the 1860s. In the early 1930s, William Lescaze purchased and renovated the townhouse as his personal studio and home, building out the front facade with a new international style contemporary facade, reconstructing the rear facade, and extending the ground floor level into the rear yard for his studio. And that massing is shown here with the ground floor studio and the residence above. Again, you can see the house is part of a row of townhomes. The slide here indicates that there are a number of other rooftop additions in this row with varying degrees of visibility over the front facade, as well as obliquely from down the street. Here you see on the left the existing facade as it is today, the front facade. At the center is the previous proposal in January, and on the right is the revised proposal. So currently the front facade and the roof is a combination of a mechanical bulkhead, various mechanical accretions and condenser units on dunnage, chimneys of varying heights, and the skylight. The previously proposed rooftop addition topped out at about 52 feet with another 3 feet for chimney and flue extensions above that, and was a simple stuccoed volume. The new rooftop addition has been reduced by about 2'9" through a combination of reducing the height of the addition itself, as well as lowering ceiling heights on the existing 3rd floor below to drop the new roof terrace and roof addition down into the 3rd floor ceiling, as well as also sloping the profile of the new penthouse addition in order to minimize the southern edge as much as possible. In addition, we're no longer proposing to raise the bulk of the existing masonry chimneys. We would now only provide painted metal flue extensions above the existing masonry in order to reach the required 3 feet above the new roof level. Similarly, looking at the rear facade, you can again see the mass of varying equipment and different chimney heights and the mechanical bulkhead that's on the existing roof, the previous bulk of the proposed addition and the taller masonry chimneys finished in stucco, and then the new revised addition, which has a slightly higher roof edge on the rear because of the slope that's been introduced into the design, but still 1'5" below the level of the previous rooftop addition, as well as the lower bulk of the chimneys and the now called out painted metal flue extensions, which would make up the required additional height. In the existing building section, again, you'll note the variety of construction on the existing roof. We've now simplified the rest of the scope so that the rear facade remains as is and the rear yard is no longer being excavated. For comparison, this is the previous proposal, which had the excavated rear yard, as well as the shifting and reconstructing of the rear facade 6 feet further into the rear yard, which is no longer being called for, and the taller and overall larger footprint of the previously proposed rooftop addition. And now, in the revised section, you see the smaller footprint of the addition set back from the existing rear parapet and set back further from the existing front parapet than was previously called for. We've pushed it another 3 feet further north off of the front parapet, though the roof edge remains where it was to create an overhanging canopy, which is in line with the existing chimneys. And again, you see all the rest of the rear facade and the rear yard remains as is. These enlarged views give you a better sense of the existing condition of the roof, as well as the profile of what's being proposed. And so again, here you could see the slope of the roof from the rear at the north down towards the front facade at the south. It's about a 1'5" drop from end to end. The dashed line here shows, and the mock-up views will show, that there is no longer any visibility over the front facade, neither of the rooftop addition nor of the raised chimneys. And you'll also see the efforts taken to step the section of the roof terrace and of the new 4th floor in order to drop it as much as possible into the ceiling of the 3rd floor to further minimize the height of the rooftop addition. And here maybe most clearly is a comparison of 3 different iterations. So the existing, the previously proposed, and the new version. And so you can see that since we're no longer shifting out the rear facade, we've pushed the footprint of the rooftop addition even further back from that rear facade. On the whole, the entire square footage of the addition has been reduced by about 26%. And as I mentioned, a 2'9" drop in the overall height and a 3-foot further setback from the front facade. To give you a little bit of a better understanding of some of the existing conditions and how we integrate with them, some photos of the roof. So here you see the southeast chimney, which is currently integrated with the mechanical bulkhead, which would be removed. We would actually propose to remove the upper 16 inches of brick from this chimney in order to make it less visible and to bring it in line with the southwest chimney. And these 2 chimneys would then bracket the rooftop addition and the roof plane. And currently the southwest chimney has this sort of stepped profile. We would fill in the brick in this hatched red area in order to clean up the massing of this, have it match the southeast chimney, and create kind of a symmetrical pair of volumes that supports the addition. So here you see a cutaway section of the existing and the proposed, with the setbacks at the front and at the rear, and the more streamlined horizontal volume of the addition, which, as I mentioned, is really expressed as this kind of horizontal roof plane that's held by the chimneys on either side. Moving ahead to the mock-up views, the image on the left shows the previous mock-up directly across 48th Street. You can see that the raised chimneys would have been visible. You can also see the existing condenser unit, which is visible over the front facade. The new mock-up, nothing is visible over the front facade, and this condenser would be removed as part of the renovation. In a rendered version of the same view, again, you would see that there would be 2 stucco chimneys with no metal flue extensions in the previous version. And in this version, nothing is visible at all, as the mass of the chimney is lowered slightly on the east side and the metal flue extensions are set a bit further back so that they're not visible over the front facade. And then moving to the west, a bit more becomes visible. So previously, you could see both the chimneys and sort of the mass of the south facade of the penthouse. In the new version, we've grayed out, and that's the upper band here, the previous height of the addition. And the thin red line that's below is the leading edge of the roof overhang on the south side, just slightly visible over the neighboring roof. Moving further west, it becomes a bit more visible. So again, much more visibility previously. You can't, it's just barely visible. There's a thin red line just above the roof of 209 East 48th. That would be the visibility of the west face of the addition. And again, you would see the raised chimneys and you would see a thin line of the leading roof edge on the south side. This is the rendered view of the same. Really, the only thing that's visible are the 2 stub-ups of the stucco finished chimneys at the southeast and southwest corners versus the larger bulk that was previously proposed. And then this is from the corner of 3rd Avenue, the southeast corner of 3rd Avenue and 48th Street. This is one of the more visible views. So the red line indicates the new sloped profile of the roof, as well as the overhanging roof along the south facade. In gray, you can see the previous profile. And you can also note that we've removed the extensions of the chimneys here. And then this is probably the most visible position, the southwest corner. Again, the same idea. The tower begins to block a bit of the party wall facade, but you would see the sloped profile of the roof and a stucco wall here, and then just the overhang of the rooftop addition. And in the rendered view, you could see that really the emphasis here becomes on the bulk of the existing chimneys, which are refinished in stucco with a light gray painted flue extension on top. the kind of sloped horizontal coping of the roof and the overhanging roof along the south side. The glass facade is recessed back behind the overhang of the roof and behind the two existing chimneys, so that you don't really read that south facade anymore from the street. It's mainly just the roof plane and the chimney bulk. And then again, from the northwest corner, in this case, the majority of the view is taken up by the chimney itself, both in the previous version and in the new version. The main difference being that the chimney bulk is no longer being raised. So it would be the existing chimney refinished in stucco with a metal flue extension. And then as you begin to walk back east towards the property, the addition disappears roughly midway between the corner and the property itself behind 209. And from the east, the visibility was always relatively minor. And so again, in the revised version of this, the majority of what would be visible would be just the uppermost corner of the chimney and perhaps a little bit of the edge of the roof overhang once the existing mechanical bulkhead is removed here. Oh, sorry, let me go back. This is, again, further east down the block. You kind of lose the entire rooftop addition in the overall streetscape and roofscape. So based on the commission's prior feedback and our conversations with the homeowner, we've worked significantly to reduce both the overall scope of the proposed work at this property, as well as the footprint, the height, the visibility, and the massing of the rooftop addition. The new proposal shrinks the overall area of the penthouse addition by more than a quarter, sets it back further from both the front and rear parapets, reduces the overall height both of the addition and of the chimneys, and pushes the massing down into the ceiling of the third floor to the degree that it's possible to further reduce height. The resulting penthouse is partially visible from only a couple of positions to the west, and in those instances, the emphasis is on the massing of the existing chimneys and on the horizontal profile of the metal roof coping. The proposed scheme looks to convert an existing patchwork of mechanical accretions on the roof into a minimal rooftop addition, framed and concealed by the existing chimneys and meant to blend into the streetscape and the roofscape of the block. Thank you.
Commissioners, I'd like to add just one thing. We talked about it last time.
Okay,
that,
Wayne, can you just state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. The name is Wayne Tourette, the principal of Tourette Collaborative. Last time we mentioned that the research we did at the Syracuse Library, the Lescaze Library, we found correspondence from Lescaze's assistant while this was being built about installing beams for a future addition. The addition was never built, and we don't know what the design of it would have been. But I think it's significant to know that he was contemplating an addition. And I think that our addition, although not a Lescaze addition, is not offensive and possibly even close to what Lescaze would have done. I just thought that was important.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do we have any questions? All right, not seeing any questions. I am going to ask you all to start to unmute so we can begin our discussion. And before we do that, I think we did also, again, on this one, receive a letter. So Rich, will you just mention that for the record?
Yes, we did receive a letter from Doko Momo in opposition to the application.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we'll begin our discussion. And I think, as Elizabeth pointed out at the beginning, the last time we saw this, most commissioners were, well, I think all commissioners were uncomfortable with the changes to the rear facade and pushing the rear facade out. And so that's been eliminated from the proposal, and we thank the applicants for that. And then with respect to the rooftop addition, many commissioners thought that a rooftop addition could be okay if it were made less visible and or smaller. And so the applicant has worked on their rooftop addition some more and presented, I think, a scheme that shows something that's minimally visible from many points, although from this corner, one does see it, but in this point maximum visibility, I think the applicant is stating that, you know, you're really sort of seeing the chimneys and the side wall. And I would also add that it is in some ways visually disassociated from the house on which it sits, and sort of see it over the adjacent building, and it's not a historic district in this location. And but you see it over the adjacent building, and in the context with the backdrop of other larger buildings, and I think it sort of blends away with that. So for me, I think it's addressed those concerns, but let's go around the table and have that discussion. Commissioner Lutfi, would you like to start this one?
I mean, I happen to agree with what you have said, and all I really want to say is that I think the addition works. I believe that the mechanicals are screened very nicely, and in a way, the color of the material on the addition kind of blends with the background, and I can accept this.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson.
I have a couple of issues. I mean, landmark, the way I wrote it last night, an individual landmark is a special thing. It has a higher standard of just the fabric, or fabric of a higher standard than a historic fabric. And so my issue is there are very few individual landmarks, and they're special. And so what standard can I use? How should I decide on a rooftop addition? And this becomes problematic for me because, you know, I live 2 blocks away. I live on 47th Street. I pass by that building all the time on the way to the subway, to the E-train. And I look diagonally each time I pass. And now when I look diagonally, I'm going to see a box on top of it framed by an existing brown building, you know. So it's not vanishing for me. It becomes an addition. And individual landmark, special, this, something else, then it's not an individual landmark anymore. It becomes something else for me. So I find it difficult, problematic.
Okay. Commissioner Gustafson?
Well, while I agree with Commissioner Jefferson about the special nature of an individual landmark, we do at times allow visible rooftop additions on some fairly spectacular individual landmarks. And this one, compared to some of those that we've approved, this one, because it is masked by that building in between, doesn't even appear to be a rooftop addition on the individual landmark that we're looking at. It is, I think, Chair Carroll's word was disassociated from the individual landmark. I'm going to be quoting her all day now that she's become more vocal. So be careful with your words. I just want to highlight how, sometimes our comments cause an architect to do a lot of deep thinking, and in this case, they changed a number of aspects of the building that allowed for them to continue to have a rooftop addition, but to comport with our requirement that it be less visible. I think they did a terrific job of that. So I think this is appropriate now as is.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shamir Baran.
Boy, let's see. I really think that the modifications that they made to their original design helped a great deal in allowing for this thing to be sort of more like its original self-intention and more modest in general. I really agree with Commissioner Jefferson about the kind of sort of the why a rooftop addition and how on an individual landmark. But I also do agree with you about the disassociation with Commissioner Gustafson about the way in which, this is done sort of carefully and quietly and seems not, and in many senses appropriate. I really wish that this could have been based on a drawing that we found from Lescaze that told us what the intention was for the rooftop addition. And I think that would have just clarified so much. And I almost feel that without that, I actually don't think it's correct to proceed. But I also think that given what we're seeing here, it could be appropriate. So I'm struggling with this, but I think it meets some kind of threshold of appropriateness.
Okay. Commissioner Holford-Smith?
Yeah, I agree that it's always tough when you're dealing with an individual landmark, but I think Commissioner Gustafson put it really well. And I think the reduction in the height and setting it back, and just, you know, as you said, it does have this sort of disassociation with the actual landmark. I think that if you're standing on this corner, you may not actually realize that it's actually on top of the Lescaze building. So I can find it appropriate at this point.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
I agree with the remarks of several of the commissioners and yourself, Chair Carroll. I think that for what I want to just say that the applicant has made overall changes in the proposal, which were very important, I think, for the character of the individual landmark. And with regard to the rooftop addition, you know, in order, I think it's been minimized to the point that it is appropriate, granted that anything can be appropriate. And I do think both that there was a general intention of the architect and the fact that you in the context, we can perceive this as appropriate. It is, we're not really looking to, there is no way to, and we are not seeking to replicate in some fashion the original design intent of the architect. But I think the question is this appropriate in the context? And I think the answer is yes, so I can support this.
Sorry, Commissioner Goldblum. I think we may have lost him. Okay, Commissioner Devonshire.
Thanks, Sarah. First, I'd just like to say that I'm absolutely pleased that they're leaving the rear facade and all of that commotion that was going on back there alone. It is an individual landmark. I am mildly upset at the visual trickery of the illustration in which they've taken the sunlight off of the south facade so that it's not so apparent on the addition as well. You know, unlike the earlier rendering where both of the facades are heavily sunlit, now they've thrown the whole thing in shadow, you know, playing visual tricks. That said, I do agree with you that there is a disassociation now that I think makes it, I think as Adi said, it is on the threshold of approvability for me. But I have to say I'm mildly disturbed that they would play that visual game with us.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll have to figure out what's happening with that rendering. Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, I agree with the commissioners that we wish we know the original intent of the architect, but I'm in agreement with Commissioner Gustafson and Harold Smith, that this is appropriate. I'm glad, I agree with Commissioner Devonshire that I'm glad that they left the back alone and that this is approvable.
Okay. All right, great. So I think we have a consensus.
Do you want me? Or you're just going to leave me out of it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I had a note by your name. So I didn't see a blank spot. I'm so sorry.
You should want me, because I want to clear up this this confusion about the rendering. It's very simple. Look closely. It's two different photographs, two different times of the year, even. Certainly two different times of the day. So I don't think it's trickery. Maybe they should have used the same, but they didn't. Nonetheless.
Yeah, and I also just got a note from Corey that it was taken on a different day with a different mock-up.
Different cars parked and everything else.
Well, but however, if it was done on a sunny day, the thing would be much more apparent than it is in the shadowed photograph. So, you know.
Whatever. For me, whatever I say, because if there was ever a building, a townhouse, I'm gonna be at an extreme at odds here. If there's ever a townhouse, whether it's part of a district or an individual landmark, that wanted a rooftop addition because of the typology of the original, I would say this would be it. So the fact that it is second in a row and it is not so apparent, I think if anyone is upset by that, and I can see most people are, my fellow commissioners are, that helps assuage the problem. But so obviously I don't have a problem. I think what they've done, however, and let's start with the back. Thank you for leaving that all alone. That was the right thing to do. And then the rooftop addition has been minimized to a great extent, and I think that was important to do. But nonetheless, I don't have a problem with it at all. I think probably if Lescaze had wanted one more open space, he probably would have said, let's go up on that roof too, but he already had a lot of open space in the back. So there we go. I'm all for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I think we have enough commissioners to vote to approve this. So we'll go ahead and make a motion. Commissioner Holford-Smith, would you make this motion?
Yes. In the matter of LPC 2103-913, 211 East 48th Street, Lescaze House, an individual landmark. A modern style residence and office building designed by William Lescaze and built in 1933-34. The application is to extend and reconstruct the rear facade. That's not true.
Oh, the application remains calendared. It's when it's calendared, that description doesn't change. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll just note that was removed from.
Okay.
After
so application is to extend and reconstruct the rear facade, excavate the rear yard, construct a rooftop addition, and extend chimneys. I recommend approval, finding that the building was originally constructed as a brownstone row house in 1865 and was redesigned by William Lescaze, who removed and extended the front facade of the building in 1933. Therefore, the construction of a rooftop addition is in keeping with the building's history of extensions and alterations. That the simple design and materiality of the proposed rooftop addition, featuring stucco cladding and brick chimney extensions with metal flues, will relate well to the historic alterations. That while the rooftop addition will be visible from public thoroughfares, it will not be visible directly in front of the building and only at an angle from the east and west, and will be set back from the primary and rear facades, allowing for the original volume of the building to be legible. That the proposed work at the roof will eliminate existing visible mechanical units and the bulkhead, and that the work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of this individual landmark.
Great. And Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right. Rich, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum, I believe, stepped away. Commissioner Gustafson.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Nay.
Commissioner Letby.
Aye.
And Commissioner Holford-Smith.
Aye.
Okay, with 9 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 not present, the motion carries.
Okay, so that's approved. Thank you. And we'll move to the next item now.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next two public meeting items are going to be presented together. I'll read them both in now. This is items 3 and 4. Item 3 is LPC 21-03235, application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 98, Lot 1, 250 Water Street in the South Street Seaport Historic District. This is currently a parking lot, and the application is to construct a new building. And item 4, LPC 21-04480, application for a binding report in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 72, Lot 1, 89 South Street, aka 175 John Street, South Street. This is also an empty lot, and the application is to construct a new building. Both were last presented at the public hearing of April 6, 2021. No action was taken at that time, and the applicants are here to present their revised proposal after we open the proceedings.
Okay, thank you, Corey. All right, and I want to just also note for the record that a few commissioners are recused on this item. So Commissioner Bland, Commissioner Holford Smith, and Commissioner Devonshire are all recused and not present for this meeting. And so Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Luttrell, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so the proceedings are open and the applicants may begin.
Okay, Chris, you have control of the screen. Just click on the presentation, state your name for the record, and you may begin.
Good morning, Commissioners. I would like to thank you for your time and consideration of our proposal to redevelop the parking lot at 250 Water Street. This new building will repair a gap in the streetscape that has existed.
Can you please identify yourself for the record, please?
Sure. Saul Sherrill from Howard Hughes Corporation. Good morning, Commissioners. I'd like to thank you for your time and consideration of our proposal to redevelop the parking lot at 250 Water Street. This new building will repair a gap in the streetscape that has existed for over 50 years. In addition, it will create permanent, deeply affordable housing, as well as assist the South Street Seaport Museum in renovating, reopening, and planning for the expansion in the South Street Seaport Historic District. Our team has carefully considered the thoughtful comments made in April on the 250 Water Street building, and in response, we have further reduced its heights as much as feasible in an effort to retain these essential goals. Based on your comments, the architects have also made meaningful, impactful design refinements, which together with the height reduction, I strongly believe make this an appropriate building for your consideration. As a born New Yorker and a young visitor to the Seaport in the 1980s, the opportunity I've been provided over the past several years to work on its revitalization is a privilege that I do not take for granted. Each and every day that I walk around the Seaport Historic District, I gain a deeper appreciation for all that is significant and delightful throughout the area. As I walk, I see great old buildings that honor our past and interesting new buildings that celebrate our future. I experience the unmatched sense of history among the cobblestones, the piers, and the historic ships that we cannot and should not take for granted. I'm also very excited for the opening of the Tin Building later this year and the historic elements that we've been successfully able to incorporate into the building. While surrounded by modern office buildings, the core of the historic district retains the sense of place and scale essential to its special character. However, the empty parking lot at 250 Water Street detracts from this character. I think we can all agree that the lot erodes a pedestrian's perception of the historic district and its boundaries. Walking past the parking lot at 250 Water Street does not conjure up our city's maritime past. Instead, in my opinion, it's a sad reminder of a failed vision for the past 50 years. I believe the new building at 250 Water Street is appropriate, and the streetscape views you will see today demonstrate the success of the two-part massing strategy our architects carefully developed in response to your comments. From all points within the historic district, the base of the new building will complete the streetscape and complement the existing historic scale. The design will restore the pedestrian experience, which was diminished over 5 decades ago when 250 Water Street became a full block parking lot surrounded by a chain link fence. I respectfully disagree with those who suggest that the most important determinant of appropriateness is height or conformance to the as-of-right zoning envelope. A modern and feasible development on a full block site located at the edge of the district in 2021 cannot and should not replicate the scale of 19th century development. The reduction of the base of the building from the as of right and previously approved design produces a better connection with the surrounding lower scale buildings and creates a more appropriate building within the historic district. Will there be places from which you will see the taller bar portion of the building? Yes, of course, but mostly the bar would be seen in the context of larger buildings at its edge without overwhelming or detracting from the surrounding historic buildings. In addition, there's no question, in my opinion, that an analysis of the as of right zoning or even the previously approved building on this lot clearly demonstrates that the resulting buildings would overwhelm Water Street and would not respond to the different conditions existing on Pearl Street. We've also made every effort to reduce the height of the new building while maintaining the core program that is so crucial to its success and the overall benefits it will provide to the historic district. This building responds to the unique conditions of its site. We have designed a project that can be built, one that works for this community. We have no interest in designing a building that will fail or remain unbuilt for another 5 decades. Together, the proposals for new buildings at both 250 Water and John Street offer a unique opportunity to repair the neighborhood fabric of the historic district and strengthen the cultural institution that gives it meaning and that I remain committed to. I recognize that the commission is not tasked with considering the benefits to the museum or the affordable housing. However, these benefits, as well as the design for the new museum building on the John Street lot, have separately and always been a crucial component of our project goals for the historic district and are strongly supported by many community stakeholders. At the last public hearing, Chair Cower remarked that appropriateness was a flexible standard that allows for a broad range of solutions. With the help of your comments, we have revised the design to make it better. We hope that you will agree that the proposal you will see today merits the commission's support. Thank you again for your consideration, and I will now turn over the presentation to Chris Cooper from SOM. Chris?
Thank you, Saul. Good morning, commissioners. This is Chris Cooper, and I'll be presenting today. We've organized our presentation today into 3 broad sections. First, we'll describe in detail the modifications to the design in response to your comments. And then we'll focus on the character of the site and context and conclude with a series of views of the revised proposal. As a reminder, we first came before the commission in January with a 2-tower proposal atop a contextual podium. We heard many comments about overall height and typology, as well as detailed commentary on the character of the architectural design relative to the district. We returned in April with significant changes, dramatically adjusting the height in the area with a new typology and a redesigned street facade. We heard additional comments relative to the scale and proportion of the base, floor heights, and window sizes. And we heard further comments on the bar height, contrast, and articulation. Today, we return with additional modifications based on your comments. The modifications aim to refine the height, scale, and proportion of the base, and to simplify the articulation of the bar, reducing contrast, variation, and shadow to enable a more background presence within the district. We'll start with our adjustment to the height of the base and street wall. Our prior proposal, as represented here in this Water Street elevation, was composed of 5 floors of commercial space atop a ground floor storefront. The maximum height of the base and the street wall was 95 feet, stepping down to 79 feet, and again to 64 feet. We have first removed a full floor of commercial space from the base, and this adjustment reduces the street wall in some places by 16 feet, and it simplifies the intermediate step from the street wall to the bar. Additional adjustments reduce other portions of the street wall by 3 feet, and I'll show those in some more detail. At the street wall, we heard many positive comments on the detail and articulation, but received several comments focused on the scale, the proportion and the height of the storefront, and the typical windows above, and the overall height of the cornice line. And we have responded by lowering the cornice line, reducing the floor-to-floor height, reducing the window size, and lowering the second floor to further reduce the storefront height. And the result, seen side by side, new proposal on the right, is a finer resolution. It's a finer resolution of the street wall that responds more harmoniously to the adjacent context and with more appropriately scaled windows. I want to show this in a little bit more detail, some of these changes. To make these changes, we looked first at the floor-to-floor heights in the base. 10-foot clear is a critical dimension for modern office space to maintain the viability of the commercial space. So we've adjusted the overall height by changing our structural and mechanical strategies to remove 4 inches from each floor, 2 inches of slab thickness and 2 inches of mechanical space. And focusing very specifically on the window size and proportion, we have reevaluated the floor to ceiling expression of each window. And while trying to maintain and balance the need for ample and appropriate daylight in the spaces. You know, I bring up daylight as an important point, and as a reminder, the base floors, by their very nature, are full block, deep spaces that will struggle for access to light and air. And so to balance the character and proportion of the masonry on the exterior facade, we have to calibrate the openings to maximize the penetration of daylight. There are wellness standards, and we are just on the line of achieving those. So our strategy has been to reproportion the windows by raising the sill, which together with the floor-to-floor reduction reduces our overall window height from 11 foot 7 inches to 9 foot 9 inches. It's a 16% reduction in height of each window. And that reduction in height changes the proportion of the windows, but it also changes the overall proportion of masonry to glass in the facade and adds additional texture and detail to our street wall facade. At the storefront, we have removed a full foot of height on all faces of the building. And we've also reduced the width of many of the posts, particularly the corners, and I'll show you that, bringing a finer grain and detail to the storefront. And you'll also note here in this side-by-side comparison, a very subtle shift in color, a slight darkening, which tracks around the base to the bar building. And as we'll see shortly, it helps reduce the contrast and better interlocks the base and the bar. The height of the storefront is really established by the Pearl Street side of the building. That's the highest elevation of the block. And so we've reduced the retail height on Pearl Street to its lowest feasible dimension. And then as the grade slopes down towards Water Street, the clear ceiling heights increase. But we've stepped the location of the lintel relative to the slab so that we can maintain a smaller opening, a smaller window on all sides of the building. And the final adjustment of the base street wall is the detail of the cornice itself. We've extended the projection of the cornice to its maximum allowable dimension of 12 inches rather than the prior 8 inches. And we've shifted the alignment to be equal with the finished floor elevation. So this shift down, coupled with the floor-to-floor adjustments, brings the top of the cornice down by 3 feet from much of the storefront facade. And all of these adjustments together make a significant difference to the overall height and bulk of the base. In some locations, the street wall lowers by nearly 16 feet, while in other areas it lowers by 3 feet. And stepping back to the overall composition of the Water Street elevation, we can see the prior range of street wall and base heights, 95, 79, 64. And now the proposed. The bulk is significantly reduced. The overall scale and texture are lower and more refined. The windows are tighter, and the difference between the window and the balcony areas are more pronounced. We shift prior and current. And paired directly, here shown face to face with the existing facades across the street on water, we begin to see a greater balance, a balance of scale, proportion, and texture of one side of the street to the other. So we'll show a couple of views of these in perspective in the context of their neighbors, starting first with our prior proposal, to which we received comments on the height of the base, height of the street wall, the height and scale and proportion of the floor to ceiling windows, and the scale and proportion of the storefront. When we shift to the current, we begin to see the benefit of the height reduction, the shift in the window size, the impact of the lower reproportioned storefront. And I'll shift back, forward. See the street wall coming down, storefront changing. And we also see, which we'll share in more detail, an adjustment to the relationship of the bar and the base. And you also see quite directly here the benefit of the removal of the commercial floor at the top of the base. A much easier shift from base to bar. And shifting over to Peck Slip, we're able to get more distance to see the building because the broad width of Peck Slip, we get a clear view of the building from within the district. And we see a more dramatic benefit in this view of removing the floor of commercial at the top of the base. We go from prior to new. We see this disengagement of the front facade from the bar. And we see the more direct connection of the height of the cornice relative to our neighbors to the north, and the lightening up of the storefront itself. So we'll shift here to the bar itself. Seen here, standing with our back against the wall of the Blue School, looking straight up. The color, detail, and texture remains distinct from the street wall to disengage the height from the streetscape experience. And that separation is further established by what we're seeing here as a 45 to 55 foot offset from street wall. But we've made several adjustments to simplify the depth, the shadows, the variation, and the contrast previously present in the bar. We'll start with the detail of the typical facade itself. Our prior proposal really used depth, texture, and shadow to create detail. And we believe it's important to maintain a nominal depth between the glass surface and the masonry surface so that the building reads as a masonry facade, not an all glass facade. But we've made many adjustments to try to quiet down the texture and detail of the facade. We focused on the depth of the lintel relative to the pier and the profile of the pier to simplify the shadow. And what you'll see also is the subtle shift in color that we've made in the bar so that there's less contrast and less brightness in the flat surfaces from the texture surfaces. So as we move forward, there's a kind of quieting down, a simplicity that's been integrated into the typical facade itself. And that bears out as we look at this, zooming out a little bit more, the typical facade as previously articulated with the texture of a series of fluted columns, changing to a much more subtle undulation, a shallower profile on the piers themselves, and a much shallower relationship between lintel and pier, and a slight shift in color to get less contrast and brightness in the bar itself. And then that follows through as we zoom out again and look at outdoor space relative to indoor space. It's important as a residential building to have outdoor space, to also get that variety and depth and texture that comes with the outdoor space. But we've worked to simplify the expression of the loggia and to shallow the depth of the loggia so there's less shadow, less contrast from one to the next. And then we zoom out again and look at the bar more broadly. And we've made a number of steps to reduce the overall height, but also to really reduce the variation and the contrast of one bar to the next. This is our prior proposal where you'll see that each crown is different from the one adjacent. There are big differences in the width of one bar relative to the next. And there are also great depth of 21 feet here between face of loggia to the most recessed bar. So we have made a series of shifts here to try to flatten the facade a bit and get less shadow and contrast from one bar to the next. And you'll see the red line of our prior depth shallowing, also the change of proportion of the most wide to the most narrow to make it more neutral, the lowering of overall height by 21 feet, which comes by a series of floor-to-floor adjustments and the removal of one residential floor. But also the consistency of each crown, one next to the other, to get less variety, less contrast, and less busyness in the bar itself, and trying to introduce a more simple approach to allow this to be more of a background figure. As seen from the Brooklyn Bridge, the bar is articulated with varying heights and depths and facade texture. And the base, at its prior height of 95 feet, is visible above the height of the Seaman Institute. As we shift with the revisions, the base height reduces, the bars lower, and becomes more quiet in articulation. Subtle shifts in color, depth, and texture introduce a more background condition. We shift here a little bit to recognize that we're proposing a building whose overall scale is different than the scale of other buildings in the district. And you will see the taller portion from a number of vantage points. But those vantage points consistently set the bar against a background of the urban environment. The most important perception of the historic district is from within the district, the pedestrian experience. The revised design with an appropriately scaled street wall recreates the kind of urban room that characterizes the narrow streets of the district and has been gone from Water Street for over 5 decades. So to consider the character of the historic district, we want to start with Schermerhorn Row, arguably the most important collection of early 19th century commercial buildings in the city. The Seaport Museum, the interpreter of history through its archive, its collection, and its historic ships, has its home here. And the commission commented favorably on the proposed improvements last time. What we also see in this view is contemporary, appropriate construction across Fulton and tall buildings in the background, which do not diminish the special historic quality of this experience. The near loss of Schermerhorn Row in the 60s initiated the efforts to preserve the Seaport, its historic bricks and mortar and narrow streets. And at the time of designation, the district also contained modern buildings, infrastructure, and empty lots. Since then, most of the district has evolved with many new buildings and some very visible rooftop additions, evolved into a neighborhood comprised of old and new. Yet throughout that evolution, 250 Water Street has remained for decades a desolate parking lot, detracting from the historic district, visually confusing the boundary of the district. The size and shape of the block were formed by the street widening in the mid-20th century, and the historic buildings were demolished. This is not an infill site. It's an entire city block on the edge of the historic district. Anything approved here will be modern of and within the district. There's no other site like this in any historic district. It's unique in size, location, and context. From the pedestrian's experience, the view into the historic district and its boundary are muddied by the presence of this enormous parking lot. Unlike other approved buildings in this historic district, the immediate context here is very different. Within the district, directly north is the recent full block Peck Slip School. To the south, on the very edge of our image here, is the modern addition to the Beekman Hospital. And even in Water Street, there are highly visible approved additions, most notably the Siemens Institute. Entering the district, as here on Beekman, we see that the demolition of the buildings on 250 has resulted in the loss of street wall, the loss of the space of the urban room. On Water Street, the negative impact of the loss of context relative to the existing urban fabric is most acute. The base of our proposed project will serve to repair this diminished space. At Pearl Street, we see the same loss of the urban room. The play space of Peck Slip School today is defined by a chain link fence, and the great room of the slip beyond is ill-defined. The opportunity for improvement is palpable. Only 1 block away, the character of the historic Seaport streetscape is fully illustrated. The pedestrian experience in the Seaport's narrow streets is enhanced by the Belgian block paving, the texture of bricks and mortar, stone and metal, and by the variety of height and form that's inspired our design approach. And 1 block further east on Front Street, we see the same variety of scale and texture that creates the appeal of the small scale of varied buildings on these narrow streets. The proximity of tall buildings is always present, but does not diminish the experience of the historic urban fabric. So the volume of area on this site, if built within the limits of the existing zoning envelope, would overwhelm its immediate context and historic streetscape. Water Street is most dramatically impacted by this bulk, resulting in an unbalanced relationship between opposing street facades. Even on Peck Slip, as a broad space in the district, the as-of-right massing raises the street wall relative to its neighbors and faces the tall mass onto the slip with just a narrow setback. And from outside the district looking in, we regain a defined district edge, yes, and an entrance into the district, yes, but one that is disproportionate to the buildings within the district that this is transitioning towards. And that relationship is highly visible from within the district. Here we switch on to Beekman Street looking west. The sheer and volume between the as-of-right and existing context is dramatic. As we have just seen, and in contrast to what we are proposing, the bulk of an as-of-right building contained by this envelope would overwhelm the district. Finding an appropriate massing requires change to this volume. So our proposal dramatically reduces the bulk facing into the district, shifts the footprint of height onto Pearl Street to better distribute the massing. The proposed two-part massing creates significant setbacks on Beekman and Water Streets to establish a solid lower scale base that's consistent with the surrounding blocks. And the result of our approach shifts the scale and the bias, the experience to the spaces created at street level to enhance the pedestrian's experience of the district. We recognize the character, scale, and texture of the historic district streetscapes with the ambition to correct the detracting conditions of the existing parking lot and to propose a restored streetscape surrounding 250 Water Street. So now the third chapter of our presentation, we want to share a series of views of the revised proposal, beginning here on Fulton Street, looking north on Water Street. We see quite clearly the revised base restores a scale-appropriate street wall, extending the experience of the historic district to the block of 250 Water Street. Approaching the building, the base successfully restores a contextual street wall in the presence of a fully built block that not only relates to, but supports and enhances the historic district. The bar, simplified with significant setbacks, does not obscure any historic building. And within the room of the street, we feel the variegated height of the base with brick and masonry materials and details that relate to the district. There's now an appropriate scale relationship between the opposing Water Street facades and to the Beekman Hospital just beyond, a taller and later addition to the district. Stepping further north on Water Street, we begin to see how the new street wall stitches together the previously disconnected blocks. And further north on Water Street, the bar becomes visible in the context of the overbuild of the Peck Slip School, but it is visibly detached from the Water Street elevations and does not detract from the features of the narrow streetscape. Stepping over to Pearl Street, the bar is fully visible and connected to this wide street. The southern offset of the bar allows the base to take foreground as we enter into the district. And the bar portion of the proposed building steps back a full 90 feet from Beekman, which opens up this entry into the historic district at a scale appropriate to the buildings surrounding this block. The new building frames one's view into the district and extends the existing Beekman Street wall out to Pearl Street. And stepping into the district, we begin to feel the space recreated by facing masonry facades on the narrow stone streets of the district. Looking back, we start with this wide angle lens, but only to show that the heights of the various corner buildings are in concert with one another. Beekman Hospital remains the tall figure in the conversation. But looking through a much more realistic 35mm lens, we see the powerful benefit of completing the intersection with a district appropriate building. Stepping back, the lower street wall and 90-foot setback to the bar allows the street wall to read as an independent building with a contextual relationship to the surrounding historic buildings. And stepping again further east, you begin to see the bar, but it's seen within the backdrop of taller buildings beyond. The setback from Beekman is so significant that the historic street wall is completely undisturbed. On Peck Slip, one of the widest spaces in the district, the new street wall height aligns with the scale of the adjacent existing buildings on Water Street, directly to our north. And the view of the bar from this vantage point is seen against the backdrop of the city, and it's visually offset from the street wall in the foreground. And when directly adjacent to the building on Peck Slip, across from the Peck Slip School, the new facade redefines the urban room. And as we move out to Pearl Street across from the Peck Slip School, we have a similar experience to Beekman, a new entrance into the district, focusing our views into the urban spaces of the district. Moving out onto Pearl Street, looking south on Pearl Street, the proposal adds definition to the district. The base of the building repairs the gap in the historic district boundary, and the tall bar is viewed primarily in the context of the newer buildings within the district and does not detract from the appreciation of any historic buildings. We're going to shift for a moment to the animation, to our walkthrough, and then conclude with just a few slides. So we're going to shift screens here, and we'll take the walkthrough as we saw last time, but with revisions that accommodate the changes we've made from your comments. So our walkthrough begins on Fulton Street, the core of the district. As we walk north to Water Street, we see the tall building relating to Pearl Street, the wide street. But as we shift here onto Water Street, we see the disengagement of the tall portions to the low. We will shift and look up and see the dramatic offsets between the street wall and the bar that disengage the street wall from the bar. And so that when we are within the space of the streets, and we are in the rooms of the streets, the room is completed, appropriate, and improved from the current condition. Stepping onto Peck Slip, the broadest and widest space in the district. We look up, we see the bar in the context of the city beyond, disengaged from the street wall. In the room of Peck Slip, recreated, a completed play space. Appropriately stepped street wall and storefront, stepping down to Water Street. The space of the slip recreated. The bar disengaged from the street wall. Thank you for bearing through the shift between the walkthrough and the presentation. I think I'll regain control of the screen. And in conclusion, the empty lot detracts from the appreciation of the historic buildings in the historic district. The new, appropriately scaled base reinvigorates the historic streetscape. The two-part massing strategy sets the bar portion to the west so that when seen in conjunction with the historic buildings, it does not call attention to itself. The site is unique in size, location, history, and context. The specificity of our response makes this building equally unique and will not set precedent for other sites in this or other historic districts. The proposed use of height is appropriate to this site in this historic district. The setback masonry strategy allows the bar to relate to its larger and more contemporary context within the district on a wide street. This allows the base of the building to respond appropriately in scale and form to the adjacent historic narrow streets. Without mimicry, the use of bricks and mortar, trabeated storefronts, divided windows, and facade details relates this new building to its direct historic neighbors in scale and texture, completing the street wall and enhancing the pedestrian experience of this historic district. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Commissioners, do we have any questions at this time? Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. And as we all know, we have received a number of written comments on the revised proposal. This is a public meeting following the public hearing of April 6th, which followed an earlier public hearing. And as we've heard testimony on April 6th, we responded with comments to the applicant, and they're now responding to our comments. But we certainly welcome written testimony and written comments. So, and we did receive them, and we have shared them with all of the commissioners, and I will just ask Rich to summarize them for the record now.
Thank you, Sarah. So we received over 400 additional letters in opposition, including from Assemblymember New, the Seaport Coalition, and a number of community and neighborhood organizations and preservation advocacy groups and area residents, excuse me. And we also received over 500 letters in support, including from the Downtown Alliance and individuals.
Okay, thank you. All right, and commissioners, if there are no other questions right now, I'm going to move us to our discussion. I have started to unmute some of you who were still muted. And, you know, I want to just start by thanking everyone who has participated in this process. We've had a robust and fair public process with 2 public hearings and about 15 hours of testimony, and we've received hundreds of pages of written materials, both in support and in opposition. And all of the materials have been shared with the commissioners throughout this process. At our last public hearing, I supported this project conceptually. I thought it could be improved with a few more adjustments, and I think the adjustments that have been presented today have improved the clarity of the design and support my reasons for finding it appropriate. I don't want to repeat my extensive reasoning that I articulated on April 6th, as it is equally applicable here. But today I will summarize and focus on the key elements. So in evaluating this proposal, I looked to the landmarks law and I noted that size and scale are not factors expressly articulated in section 25-307, which is a section of the law that sets forth the criteria for appropriateness. While clearly pertinent factors to consider, the enumerated factors are style, design, arrangement, texture, material, and color. And I think this omission recognizes that the law doesn't mandate strict adherence to size and scale, but allows the commission to do something significantly bigger if it otherwise satisfies the appropriateness standard. The key requirement in section 25-307 is that the proposed work should be analyzed in relation to the effect of the proposed work on the exterior architectural features of the contributing buildings in the historic district. I also note that the definition of exterior architectural feature, a key criteria the law requires us to consider, also does not include an explicit reference to size or scale. And as I said at the April 6th hearing, the flexibility of the law is evident in the diverse and dynamic projects that the Commission has approved over its 56 years, including within this historic district. And despite what many say, historic district designation does not freeze an area in time. And the Commission has a track record of approving change that meets the needs of property owners and the needs of the city, while respecting and protecting the architectural features of the district. And such approvals are important to allow historic preservation to adapt to a changing city. As I also have said before, I do not agree that because the Commission denied previous proposals, we must do so now. Each one of those proposals was different, and this proposal differs from those. In addition, when reviewing the current proposal, I have focused on what I believe will be the actual experience of the public of this district, the proposed building and the relationship of the two. Thus, while it may be that the district is characterized in formal and abstract architectural characteristics as relatively low scale, that is less significant than how a new building will be perceived and experienced. With new technologies such as computer-generated photo montages and animation that allows us to literally walk around the district and view the proposed building in the round, I believe we have a better understanding of how the proposed work will relate to historic context, the effects of such relationships, and a more accurate perception of how work will be experienced by the public. Next, looking at this site, in this case, I think it is important to remember that there is no loss of historic fabric. And in fact, the only loss is that of a parking lot that is an intrusion in the historic district. And as I also said on April 6th, this site is unique. It is an entire city block, and there is not any other site like this in any historic district. It is more than twice as large as the next largest vacant lot in a historic district. This is not an infill site with an immediate micro context of contributing buildings on all sides. I think this site actually erodes the edge of the district and blurs the line of that boundary, and it detracts from the distinct sense of place. Further, it is surrounded by different contexts on all sides. Smaller, older buildings to the east and larger buildings to the north and the south and outside of the district to the west. This larger context of the district being surrounded by towers was created in part by earlier efforts to protect the historic core of the district. The innovative use of transfer of development rights that resulted in larger buildings on sites on the uplands, and the receiving sites were both inside and outside of the district to preserve smaller buildings within the core of the district. And due to this preservation effort, the historic buildings in the district are often seen and experienced with taller buildings rising above and behind. And therefore, I think this context is relevant to the evaluation of this application in a way that it would not be in another historic district. And so for all of these reasons, I think a taller building that respects and relates to the historic district could be appropriate, and that an approval here would not set a precedent for any other site in any other historic district. Now, getting to the actual proposal, I think this proposal represents a fantastic opportunity to restore the street wall along Water Street with building fabric that reflects the fine grain of the historic buildings to the east, as well as relating directly to the historical hospital building on Beekman Street and the scale of the buildings to the south and the southeast. I think that the two distinct masses, one relating to the historic street wall on Water and Beekman Streets, and one set back and away from the historic and contributing buildings, also make this appropriate, and that setback will not detract from the exterior architecture of those historic buildings. Unlike the massing of the prior commission approval, the proposed two-part massing of the proposed building with its significant setbacks on Beekman and Water Streets, and for a significant portion on Pearl Street, will establish a solid lower scale base that is consistent with the block, will restore the missing street wall on Peck Slip, Water, and Beekman Streets, and will enhance the pedestrians' experience of the district. And that the abstracted taller form in lighter materials and simpler details will be read as an independent form that differentiates itself while still being compatible with the base. The changes to the floor-to-floor heights and the window proportions in the base have resulted in proportions that successfully relate to the proportions of the historic buildings across the street, and also create a successful proportional system within the building itself. The brick and stone materials relate directly to the district. The detailing of the facade provides scale and texture that are contemporary, but also commensurate with the historic details. And I think that reducing the midsection has significantly reduced the visibility of that remaining floor in that midsection and really has added clarity to the two distinct parts. The taller portion of the building will be pulled away from Water and Beekman Streets and will be seen and experienced in connection with the new and modern Peck Slip School, and before it sets down and transitions to the historic buildings on Water Street. So suffice it to say that the experience of the podium will harmonize in every way with the historic architecture of the immediate historic context, that the taller building, bar building, will be directly experienced primarily, almost exclusively in the context of new buildings. And while seen here and there over historic buildings, I believe the bar building will not detract given the architectural design, scale, materials, and color, and given the visual context of taller buildings and structures all around the historic district. To be clear, I'm not saying that the taller bar is appropriate because it is somehow transitional. I am saying that given the unique size of the site and the design, massing, materials, and color of the bar and how it is perceived, it will not detract from the exterior architectural features of the historic buildings in the district. And finally, the bar will not confuse the boundaries of the historic district. So as was noted by the applicant, I would also note that the vacant lot is not experienced as part of the district. So it currently doesn't define or contribute to the experience of the district. Walking by this vacant city block, one does not experience it as part of the district. In fact, I have found that for me, the line feels very much like it's on Water Street. Second, because the site is an entire city block, it will always be seen and experienced as something newer, something commission approved. It cannot be mistaken as historic. The 1991 approved building would not be mistaken as historic. This building won't be, and a building with an as-of-right massing would not be. And even if there was only a 5-story pedestal on the site, that would not be perceived as a historic building. The materials, the fenestration, the color, the details of the Pearl Street facade, including the bar building, will mark the design and announce to all as coming from and be appropriate for the district and respecting and relating to quote Section 307 of the law, the aesthetic, historic, and architectural values and significance of the district. And in this way, I find that the building will reinforce the district boundaries, and I have found it to be appropriate to this historic district. So with that, we will turn to others for the rest of the conversation. So Commissioner Lutfi, would you like to go next?
Sure. I would like to thank the applicants again. I did it the last time too, for once again being responsive to the Commission's feedback on the project as it relates to its context within the Seaport District. I think the project in this and the last rendition has come a long, long way from where it was at the beginning, which I have to say was largely indifferent to the surroundings, to its surroundings. I want to, during the April 6th hearing, I was very supportive of several aspects of the project, but I also had, I think, 3 important concerns that I want to speak about and discuss within the context of what we've seen today. First was that the floor-to-floor heights within the building space needed to be reduced to help it better relate to the architectural fabric and the context of the surrounding area. And forgive me if I'm going to reiterate some of the things that you've said, Sarah. But I feel like in the project's latest version, the applicant's done a very good job of reducing the overall height of the building's base, eliminating the one floor of the office space and shifting it to the residential component so that the visual lines at the top of the base are much cleaner looking and speak much better to the buildings, the lower build scale around it. And then just below, lowering the cornice, lowering the floor-to-floor heights, coupled with reducing the window size, have also helped to improve the building's relationship to the built environment in terms of size, and then also in terms of feel and materiality. Finally, lowering the ground floor height by a foot, I think helps better root the building at the street level, making it feel much more approachable and in sync with its surroundings. So now, I think probably the project is most successful at the street level. And as you said, Sarah, you can see it in the street views on 3 sides of the building. On Water Street with the new street wall, it's now in direct conversation with the historic buildings. Across from it, on Peck Slip, it speaks very clearly to the school. And on Beekman Place, even though there's been an addition of a lower street wall, because of the setbacks, there's more of a feeling of light and air between the building and the mix of some of the lower scale buildings that I had mentioned, 130 Beekman and 117, so that they no longer are going to be as overwhelmed as I think they were in earlier, an earlier rendition of the project. So that's one. Number 2, while I supported the applicant's efforts to put the project's height and mass toward the site's northern end, I still felt that it was too tall and a little bulky. And as presented today, I feel that the reductions in the overall height by removing a residential floor and having some consistency, more consistency at the crown, having a slightly, having the building be lower at its ends has been positive. And I also want to say that on its articulated facade, the shift of one window bay from the building's widest section to a narrower section on the north side, I think works, is very effective visually and helps, slightly reduce the sense of bulkiness. I mean, you can see it if you take a look at the project on page 34. I also want to say that on that page, on 34, the reductions in the height actually separate the project a bit from the higher buildings to the south. I mean, you would literally have to take a look between what was presented on the 6th and where we are now. But I think we need to go to, this is the 6th. What happens is that the building steps down a bit more and reads as if it's at a distinguished lower level from the buildings, the higher buildings on Wall Street and beyond. And I think that's a big improvement. Even though it may seem subtle, I think it makes a difference and it seems more contextual. The third thing that I also want to say that this building feels more separated from the newer residential buildings to the west on Fulton Street especially. The third thing I had expressed was concern that the project's large scale on Pearl Street really blurred the lines of the district's edge on the west. And I have to say, this is still a little challenging. I don't think there's an easy answer here. If you accept that moving the project's mass to the edges is important, which I think is, and I think has been very successful in making this project work better, it has to go somewhere. And in this situation, it ends up on Pearl Street. I think that's where it belongs, at the edge of the district, on a street where there is some variation in building heights already. I think Pearl Street can actually take the height after, considering it in more depth. And I think that the setback helps the lines as you look from north to south visually, because you're not looking directly at the tower. You're really relating more to the base. And finally, I feel that I can accept that the Pearl Street side of the project functions both as a transition and as an entry point into the district. And once you enter it, it opens up to you. So I know that there are many people who think that the project height needs to be substantially reduced. And while it might be desirable in theory, given the economics of a project like this one, I think it's doubtful that it could happen and have the project be viable. I know this is not within our purview, but it's the reality. It puts us in a situation where, with this improved project, I think we have two options: a vacant parking lot, which is not only non-contributing, it, in my opinion, detracts from the district's special character, or a project that has come a long, long way since the beginning, and is now has a much better relationship and dynamic with the buildings around it, and I believe is much more sensitive to the district's scale, proportions, and materiality. I think it respects the district's architectural integrity and character in a very positive way. And I also think it will contribute to the district's economic vitality, which is critical to sustaining it.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
Oh, yes, my on? Yes.
Yes, you're on.
So let me start with my analysis that I did last night. Historic district, empty site at the edge of a historic district. The site is an entire block, empty for 50 years. Pearl Street defines the edge of the historic district. The tower to the west of the street, and this empty lot to the east of the street. And a smaller scale, 3 to 5 story buildings towards the FDR Drive borders the East River. The tower. Base and shaft are differentiated, yes. Base by its size, proportion, in terms of height and width, reflect the scale of the district. 5-story mid-rise buildings between James Street and the FDR Drive. The design of the elements of the base, punch windows, cornice, storefront, transom grills, relate to the details of the surrounding buildings. The shaft, or bar, the placement of the bar on the northwest portion of the base reduces the visibility and makes it background that relates to the taller structures across Pearl Street. In other words, the base is foreground, the bar is background, all along a district edge street. The fundamental question to me then is, can a tower be placed in a historic district? That's the fundamental question. So in this particular unique place in the city, I wrote, the tower is located at the edge of a historic district. With the mass of the tower on Pearl Street, it does not divide the historic fabric. It redefines one of the edges of the historic district. It remains a coherent ensemble. The district remains a coherent ensemble and a recognizable place when viewed from the surrounding city and the Brooklyn Bridge. So I can approve this.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Shamir Barron?
No, Gustafson? Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yes. The applicants have, I think, succeeded in offering a solution that seeks to restore the street wall at the datum that relates to the historic Water Street buildings, and the texture of the sympathetically scaled windows in the proposed podium provides support for the fabric of this part of the district, and especially to the street itself and the kind of the image of the narrow streets. The use of natural materials, brick, stone, etc., establish a relationship with the immediate context as well as with Schermerhorn Row. And I found that your Chair Carroll's careful staging of the vantage points of a pedestrian in various stations around the site to actually be borne out in my own recent walk through the district with not very technologically advanced, a sort of homemade cutout cardboard gauge. In this sense, the effects of the proposed podium to the exterior architecture features of the building in the district and across Water Street are, I think, appropriate. It is interesting, though, that while the architectural value, design, arrangement, style, color, and materiality are these kind of tenets of appropriateness, and the concept of size and scale are not articulated in 25307 of the law, the design of the proposed podium, in that it maintains a low scale and referential character, without a doubt, in so doing, contributes to the district's special sense of place. And it really makes it clear that the criteria of size and scale certainly do apply, even if unspoken, in the case anyway of the proposed podium. But beyond architectural aesthetic value, there are other typical findings of appropriateness or its absence, and that are considered or should be considered. And the extent to which a proposed structure is integrated or by contrast calls undue attention to itself is an interesting one in my mind. To suggest that a 40, 37, 27, 23, maybe even an 11-story tower or tall bar, the word bar is kind of a little bit too innocuous, no matter the setback, simply recedes and does not call attention to itself is, I think, just a bit far-fetched. Of course, it does call attention to itself in every sense, not the least of which happens by virtue of its presence in relationship to the unassailably appropriate contextual podium. The proposed tall, broad bar is, I think it goes without saying, highly visible and cannot be unseen or not experienced. And yet I really have a question, takes us another step, which is calling attention to self in every case undue? In what sense might something that does call attention, in what sense might it be an appropriate addition to the district? Well, you know, there's another slightly perhaps less typical finding of appropriateness in some, the extent, and that is the extent to which something adheres to the historic objective or identity of the district. Now, might there be a scenario where multiple historic objectives can be associated with a district? Might there be an instance where the attention-calling structure can refer directly to one rather than to another of those histories? I would say that the Seaport sets up a more complex, compounded scenario, this particular kind of scenario. On the one hand, the designation report refers to the golden age of shipping, to ships, to building that included Romanesque revival, Greek revival, Georgian, federal-style materials and motifs. But the report also refers to the continuous alterations over the span of 200-year period from one style to the next. And it underscores a history related to expansion, to growth, and to change. Pearl Street, formerly called Queen Street, once ran along the waterfront until the latter half of the 18th century, when landfill extended the eastern boundary of Manhattan out to Water Street and later Fulton Street. And still later in the 19th century, early 19th century, South Street was created on additional landfill. Schermerhorn Row, when built in 1811 to house merchants and counting houses, was neither diminutive nor quaint. It was characterized as, quote, the first largest of its kind, the first and largest of its kind, the city's original World Trade Center. Well, perhaps not as ethically loaded or poignant as other cultural touchstones like Stonewall or Tin Pan Alley or Underground Railroad sites. The complex cultural history of the Seaport, and in particular the distinct relationship between the port and development, is critical to consider here. And I would say maybe a brazen tower bar emerging from a contextual podium might in fact be calling attention to the Seaport's distinct history of change and growth. The ensemble might tell the story of the epic tug, which began at least much earlier, but at least post 1966. So in 1966, the Seaport Museum is launched, but also the City Planning Commission launches the Lower Manhattan Plan, intended to demolish the Seaport and replace the East River Fish Market with the World Trade Center. Well, when New Jersey insisted on the World Trade Center moving to the West Side, and other things occurred, in 1968, as we know, City Hall designated, and the designation occurred of the Schermerhorn Row, and the landmark staved off the demolition. The Downtown Lower Manhattan Association, City Hall, adopted the Seaport as their proxy, intending to draw tourists downtown, naming the Seaport Museum as an official renewal sponsor for a 12-block district. I'm referring now to this kind of development history. The Seaport was the nation's first museum charged with developing an urban renewal district, and Mayor Lindsay at the time said that the arrangement was the most complex ever entered between a cultural institution and the city. So it's possible that the 250 site is, as we've learned, a unique among other district sites, but it's also the case that the district too is unique as a place where both sort of the pioneering preservation advocates assumed stewardship of 200-year-old fabric, but also the place where they pioneered experimentation with, for instance, with strategies like special districts to facilitate the transfer of development rights. So there's that. I want to say that in the many weeks since the first presentation, I've read and reread, listened and viewed all of the public testimony repeatedly. And I want to say that I've been most struck by the unusual and nearly equal number of proponents to opponents of the project. And it almost feels like, and I don't have the numbers, for every one expressing support, there's another member of the public expressing opposition. And this is really different from most cases we see where there's this kind of interloper, and then there are the local constituents. It's interesting that the language used by both sides seems to be comparable. In other words, they both seem to be championing the Save the Seaport cause, and yet they are at odds. And I've been trying to understand this. I've been trying to get my head around it because it's unusual and it must tell us something. And I've been thinking about it as sort of reminding me of something I've encountered before, something like a sibling feud. And as a slight aside, I've begun reading Rachel Holmes' new biography of the important British feminist, left internationalist, and anti-imperialist Sylvia Pankhurst. And Holmes recounts Pankhurst's participation in the family project of building a suffrage movement. And Holmes focuses on Sylvia's break with the Women's Social and Political Union founded by her mother, Emmeline, in 1903, because Sylvia disliked the turn away from popular protest towards arson and property damage. Sylvia rejected her mother and sister Christabel's separatism and authoritarianism, and she went on to run her own socialist and feminist offshoot. In her book, The Suffragette Movement, Pankhurst described the story of her own federation's break with the WSPU as a family drama. It turns out that Pankhurst's bitterness was personal as much as it was political, rooted in her resentment of her sister's hold over their mother, who she thought had been seduced away from the socialist commitments by her sister Christabel's vanity, she said, and social climbing. A reviewer of the book in the London Review of Books, Susan Peterson, notes something that I think is actually very telling. In family quarrels, one side is rarely right. And, really, who knows what is the source of sibling strife, but parental abuse, or at least mismanagement, is often a part of familial dysfunction, at the core of which is often like a big lie, a secret, a flaw. And it might be a stretch, okay, it might be a stretch, but I can't help thinking that there is some correlation here. Both sides want to save the seaport, yet they're fighting because they are operating, I believe, on the foundation of a flawed paternalistic premise that continues to cause contortions. When the Stanfords founded the Friends South Street Maritime Museum, creating South Street ships, creating a street of ships in 1977, if they did so, at the same time as the Lower Manhattan Plan started this kind of method of privatizing a public function by naming the Seaport Museum as the official renewal sponsor for a 12-block district, which Lindsay perceived as a business area ripe for development. But what they did, what he did, what was done at the time, was to employ a novel move. And I've talked about this before, and I think it is critical to understand. And the novel move was that in 1969, the Seaport Museum became an unassisted sponsor of the Brooklyn Bridge Southeast Urban Renewal District, charged with capitalizing historic resources. This set in motion a toxic, twisted dance between preservation and development. Stanford envisioned the Seaport as much old and new, where commerce could underwrite history, but how exactly could the Seaport raise funds to purchase valuable lands and to buy ships? Unfortunately, Seaport leaders always thought, following all this, that if they made concessions, like the inclusion of high-rises, for instance, they could accomplish goals of saving urban renewal district, returning tall ships, preserving the city's historic anchor. Ad hoc activist campaigns confronted incursions using grassroots coalition and experimentation with new mechanisms, like, as I mentioned before, selling air rights to help the museum undertake major urban renewal, the major renewal project. But the original sin set up by an untenable condition, the unsponsored status, left the museum continuously undercapitalized. And in the case of, for instance, the deal initiated with Rouse, it caused an exasperated Ada Louise Huxtable to sigh, "I am so weary of these stupid alliances between developers and cultural institutions in which the cultural institution is given a block of space and the developers overbuild the rest and make an enormous profit." Okay, so to go back, as an LPC commissioner, I would say, and while it might be said, that the minimum standards of appropriateness and its expanded definition, flexibility offers to include an adherence to another kind of historic vector, that standard, I would say, has been met. But as a citizen, as a downtown Manhattan resident, it must also be said, I must also say, that that might not be good enough. I believe that this moment, the present moment, today on the edge of after COVID, let's hope, after Sandy, after 2008, after 9/11, after all of it, that this present moment presents us with a profoundly new and powerful inflection point. It's the cycle of dangling carrots and unsupported dependence and disappointment. The city could step in, replacing current ownership as it has briefly in the past, armed with Biden federal recovery funds, innovative state and city grants, tax credits, conservancy structures, and philanthropy to sponsor a museum directly, untethered to the 250 Water Street site, to create low-rise, low-scale alternative to the 250 Water Street proposal, providing affordable, inclusionary family housing that is truly integrated, rethinking the use of city-owned development rights. It could support a new public good by acknowledging and addressing the tremendous climate change infrastructural needs of this 100-year-old floodplain, sponsoring proposals for structures that prioritize resiliency and mitigation measures pertaining to sea level rise and storm surge, strategies needed to reduce flooding across public and private domains. The city, not proxies or corporations, could involve the community in a collective effort, thereby fulfilling Peter and Norma Stanford's vision for a dynamic and diverse seaport in an effort to save the seaport by respecting its heritage and investing in its future.
Okay. All right. So, but just to be clear, notwithstanding the desire to see the city investment in our cultural institution in this historic district, I think you said that the minimum standard of appropriateness has been met here. Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. Commissioner Gustafson.
Sorry, you took me by surprise. I don't think I'm going to be nearly as articulate as Commissioner Shamir Barron. I guess I want to start with, I will tell you that just to start that I don't find this to be appropriate. Let's just start with that, and I'll come back to that in a second. We are asked here to respect at least two straw men. One is that the parking lot detracts from the historic district. I don't know that there is a single human being on the planet who disagrees with that. And so I'm not sure I know why it's being said over and over and over and over. I agree. I don't want to speak for any of the other commissioners, but I think that if you polled them, they would probably all agree the parking lot detracts from the district. It doesn't have any meaning to say that, but okay, it does. Building as of right, in that lovely block that they show us, I mean, blocky, Lego-esque structure that meets the as of right standard, is the second straw man. We are supposed to vote in favor of this proposal because it is better than a parking lot and better than Legoland. That's not the standard for appropriateness. Just about anything they could have proposed would therefore be appropriate. The applicant holds all of the cards here. Commissioner Lutfi mentioned the reality of the situation. Well, that's a reality that's being imposed on us by the applicant. There are literally thousands of appropriate alternatives. We are not being offered one of them. That's a choice. We are asked to imagine that there are things included in the landmarks law that aren't. I am advised by Chair Carroll that to start removing size and scale from my vocabulary, and because they are not criteria for appropriateness in and of themselves. They are not in that 25307. The other things that are not in there are affordable housing, business propositions involving museums, and also speculative investment. None of those things are in my, at least as far as I'm concerned, those things are not in the landmarks law. And that leaves me in the unenviable position of having to choose between the obviously detrimental parking lot and a building that does not have a bar on it, but has a tower on it. Call it what you will. If I don't purely look at size and scale, I am allowed to look at the impact of the structure on the historic district. And it really does depend upon your point of view. If you never are in Brooklyn and you never come over the Brooklyn Bridge, or you never look across the water from the park, as millions of New Yorkers do, then you can skip that point of view and say it just what matters is only that which matters when you're walking down the street. I apologize, I don't come from Manhattan, so not only do I walk down the streets, but I have to get there as well. And when I do, I see that point of view that millions of others do. I heard someone say that the line defining the district does not feel like it is actually where it is because of the existence of that parking lot. If we approve this project, then we are guaranteeing that even if I did agree with that from street level, it never will. The line that we drew as a commission will never feel like it's the place where it actually is. We will have confirmed it and made sure that it will never change. The district boundary will always look different. So I can't support this, and I find some great difficulty in approving the tower and all of its impact because the rest of the project, the street level part of the project, is as spectacular as it is, because the street level part of it truly is extremely well done. And if it stood alone with a second level, a modest second level above it, I could buy this, but I can't as it is.
All right, thank you. And, you know, just to also clarify my statement about size and scale, I said that they were pertinent factors to consider. I did say that they were not explicitly mentioned in the law. So I just want to clarify that. And we do look at size and scale all the time. And if this were a mid-block site in the middle of historic buildings, size and scale would be an even, you know, more important factor. But in this case, I found that the size and scale was appropriate because of the location, the size of this lot, and the uniqueness of the lot, and the uniqueness of the history of this district. So we don't take that out of our vocabulary. They are pertinent factors. I mentioned that they were not explicitly mentioned because the law, I assume, gives us the flexibility to think about how it can fit in various locations. Okay, so I'm going to move on to Commissioner Chapin. Commissioner Chapin? Yeah, just unmute. Yeah, thank you.
I was still muted. First, I want to affirm that I see our review of this application as a unique situation, which does not create a precedent for other sites or applications. The site, an entire city block, is located at the edge of the historic district and is seen in conjunction with many non-historic buildings. It is not in the middle of the district or a more typical lot with historic buildings on all sides. Overall, I find that the applicant's substantial changes in response to the Commission's comments have created an approvable proposal appropriate to the district, which will not change the public's perception of the district to its detriment. The most important changes in this regard for me have been the overall reductions in height and bulk, the change in the tower massing from two higher towers set on the plinth, setting the height bulk toward the Pearl Street edge adjacent to taller buildings outside the district, the use of substantial setbacks separating the base and towers, the elimination of terraces, and the simplification of setbacks. Also, the most recent reductions, simplifications, and softening of contrasts in the bar. These changes have all served to separate the towers from the tower base in streetscape views from multiple aspects. To me, these changes are critical because finding the integration of the proposed development into the district appropriate depends in large part on how it will be perceived within and adjacent to the historic district from a street level perspective. I believe these changes and those made to the base buildings will make it possible to stand and walk within and near the streets of the district and view the new building as appropriately fitting into the district and streetscape in terms of height and massing. From within the district, the tower portion doesn't detract because the current experience of many of the historic buildings is with taller buildings behind them, and the color, materials, and fenestration of the tower portion relates to the district. When one is immediately adjacent to the tower portion on Peck Slip, it is completely in the context of the large, modern, new school building. And when one looks into the district from Pearl and Peck Slip, the building appropriately steps down dramatically to meet the lower street wall on Water Street. Changes to the lower base buildings have also helped to make the development more appropriate in other regards. The decreases in variation in height, changes of solid to void proportions, added texture and detail throughout the base streetscape buildings, including cornices and lintels, and their storefronts, is equally important in making what could be a monolithic structure fit in appropriately to the context, and has helped create a dialogue with existing historic structures across from them. And the most recent reductions in floor heights, cornice, and fenestration proportion changes and removal of a residential floor have further improved this relationship. Finally, I find the replacement of the parking lot with street scale buildings fronting on Pearl Street is a great positive for the district. So I can support this project.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Goldblum, I believe you are
I'm here,
present,
but
yeah.
I was not here enough to, I think, give a proper reflection of the presentation. So, I mean, I did preview the project, but I don't know if you want me to respond to that preview or not.
Okay, I think if you weren't here for the presentation, it probably doesn't make sense.
Very good.
Unless you want to.
I probably should not.
Okay, all right.
I mean,
Commissioner, well, yes, please.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
I mean, I can say that when I did look at the project beforehand, even though I think it has improved as an, on the street level experience within the district, the concerns that I had at the last presentation have not been materially addressed, and therefore for me it would remain inappropriate.
Got it. Okay, Commissioner Chen.
Yes, there's been a long and interesting case because I could see I had to thank all the commissioners, all the participants for actually, as you know, as I mentioned during the last hearing, I took this very, very seriously, not because of my interest in Seaport, but not just interest as a historian, but of my family ties with the Seaport history and my affinity to Lower Manhattan and all that it represents. And I think I'm very glad, and actually I stayed up to 2 o'clock on Sunday morning to, as a glutton for punishment, I reheard some of the testimonies and all the commissioners' comments again, including Commissioner Goldblum's comment, as well as the excellent comment about that the last approval of the site, that the monolith today would have been voted differently because based on the last approval. So from that standpoint of view, as Commissioner Gustafson said, and as Commissioner Goldblum said on the last meeting, the base is spectacular. This is kudos to the architect for a very, very well done, very, very sensitive design contextually. When I went to architectural school, because it's not just an architectural school, it was a school of environmental studies. One of the first things we were taught, just say, don't you ever design the building in context. The 4 street blocks are the same. If you're facing the north, you have less sunlight, you may want to do the skylights. Facing the south, maximize the energy gain, the exposure. If you're facing the east, in this case, Water Street to the Seaman Institute, and if you're facing the west, the broader boulevard, Contextually, this is a brilliant job, no question about it. I think the struggle for us is that family feud. Both claim that they want to save the seaport. They both are interests of the seaport. And you look back, the one thing that is missing from the discussion and one of the required reading book for an architecture student when the time I went to school was the fourth dimension, time. Time. Time has come. Time has proven. Time has shown what all the hypotheses can or cannot do. And so I went back and looked back on the origin of this place, the transfer of development rights. The transfer of development rights is the survival. So we are basically being asked, I want to have a cake and eat it too. I want to have a cake and eat it too. Very much what I referred to the last time when I was at community board. I want you to restore the grandfather's clock at your cost, but nothing added. Nothing added. The other thing that's missing, and that's clearly besides the well done thing, is the lack of connection, the discontinuity. Every urban planner is taught that says, don't do a sterile wall, don't do a blank wall. You need to maintain that connection. And in this case, it's about connectivity. The beauty of Lower Manhattan that Europeans and all the visitors, international visitors want to see is the ability to explore like a poetry. The cobblestone street, the low scale, the beauty of the area that you can explore and visit. And the base here will do it very, very well. That restores the ability to have some vitality. So it comes back to these great questions. What do we do with this family feud? In this case, you shift the transfer of development rights to as far away as possible to the edge, the original edge of the water. Because mind you, as we all know, the original edge of the water is none of the historic district. It got filled in time and time and time again. So we are faced with, as I said again, I wish King Solomon is sitting next to me and whispering in my ear. I wish my father is sitting next to me and whispering in my ear and just say, son, do the right thing. What is the right thing here? We're wishing hope against hope. Time and time again just says, you can do this, you can do this. And time again, for half a century, is the Joni Mitchell parking lot. And so I would say at this moment in time, given no other choices, I agree with Adi and all the rest of the commissioner that this has met the minimum standard.
Okay. All right. Again, I want to thank everyone for participating. As I said, we've had 2 public hearings and a public meeting today where we've heard 15 hours of testimony and we've read hundreds of letters and, thank all of the public that have participated and sent those comments. I want to thank all of you commissioners for all of the time that you have dedicated to this and the thought that you've put into it, reading all of the letters, listening to all the testimony, evaluating the project, thinking about appropriateness. And I think this was a very, robust discussion. And I am, just so grateful to have all of you as a team here. So I think that while we do have 2 commissioners who do not support the project, I think we have 6 of us who will. So I think we should go ahead and make a motion and take the vote and see where we are. So Commissioner Chapin, would you read the motion?
Okay, hold on just a second until I get the comments out. Thank you. I'll make sure I've got the right one. Sorry. Hold on a second. Sorry, Sarah, for the hold up here.
That's okay.
Traces. Okay. Okay. In the matter of its certificate of appropriateness, Borough of Manhattan, LPC 2103235, 250 Water Street, South Street, Seaport Historic District. A parking lot. Application is to construct a new building. I note that the South Street Seaport Historic District consists of small scale, 4 to 6 story commercial buildings on small lots constructed in the mid-19th century, as well as approximately 15 new or reconstructed buildings. The district is surrounded by taller later buildings, some of which were built using an innovative development rights bank created to preserve the district. Staff also notes that numerous buildings were demolished to clear most of the 250 Water Street site, and the size and shape of the block was modified for street widenings and extensions on Pearl Street in the mid-20th century prior to the designation of the historic district, and that this site has been used for parking since at least the 1970s. I recommend approval, finding that the South Street Seaport Historic District features a significant number of commission-approved modern buildings, including those built on lots that were vacant at the time of designation, reconstructions of non-contributing buildings, and large visible rooftop additions, resulting in a heterogeneous composition in which new and old buildings coexist. That the unusually large size of this full block vacant site on the edge of the district is a unique condition, and therefore the construction of a larger building on the site would not be a precedent for this or other historic districts. That the existing full block site is currently used as a parking lot and has no historic fabric, and that it does not contribute to an understanding or experience of, and in fact detracts from, the South Street Seaport Historic District. That in the 19th century, this site was densely developed with a variety of independent buildings and no open space. And this proposal will reconstitute the presence of a fully built out block with varying street wall heights consistent with the historic condition during the major period of significance of this historic district, and therefore will strengthen and reinforce the site's relationship to the historic district. That the site is located at the western edge of the district, away from the river, which was the focus of the historic district, in an area with larger buildings from later periods, such as the contemporary Peckslip School to the north and the historic former hospital building to the south, thus supporting the presence of a development with a larger, broader and larger footprint and taller street wall than what is found in other areas of the historic district. That the two-part massing of the proposed building will establish a solid lower scale base that is relatively simple in form and massing and is consistent with the built volume of many blocks found in the historic district, while the abstracted form of the taller, undulating bar rising from the northwest portion of the site will read as an independent form that differentiates itself while being compatible with the base. That the proposed building's 3 to 5 story base is subdivided into smaller modules that relate to the scale of buildings found along Water Street and in the historic district in terms of height and width. That the significant setbacks from the southern and eastern facades to the bar building create and reinforce a strong reading of the base as distinct from the bar building, allowing the base to better relate to the historic buildings on Beekman and Water Streets in terms of height and massing. That the proposed material palette of the base, featuring orange and red toned brick and cast stone elements with light mortar and painted metal storefronts, garage doors, and windows, will relate to the warm tone masonry and painted metal materials of surrounding historic buildings in terms of color, texture, and finish. That the use of punch window openings with prominent lintels and integrated sills and a masonry field and treated precast bases with metal storefronts relates to the traditional fenestration materials and composition of buildings in this historic district. That the base of the building has been articulated with a variety of design elements, including projecting cornices, storefronts with bulkheads and transom grills, windows with mullions set at varying depths within their openings, and balconies with metal railings and planter boxes at select locations to relate to the details and variation found at buildings in the surrounding streetscapes. That the differentiated treatment of a limited portion of the facade on Pearl Street to integrate it physically and visually with the bar building will tie the two-part massing together in a location removed from a historic context while adding architectural interest to the otherwise regular treatment of the facade. That the design and massing of the proposed taller bar building appears narrow from certain vantage points, specifically when viewed from the north and south, and does not call undue attention to itself and away from the historic buildings within the district. That the bar has been situated at the northwest periphery of the block along the boundary of the historic district and away from the core of historic buildings further east and adjacent on Water Street to minimize its visibility from key vantage points within the core of the district and located as far inland as possible from the waterfront of this Seaport historic district. That due to the significant setbacks on Beekman and Water Street, the bar is seen as a tower element primarily in connection with non-historic buildings on Beekman and Pearl Street, and therefore it will not detract from the exterior architectural elements of the historic building in the district. That the design of the bar, including vertically fluted precast columns with a beige finish, a differentiation in proportions of solid to void ratios, and restrained palette of the design elements recalls the materials, details, and color of the building in the district and brings unity to the overall design while being distinct from the base. That from the many views within the district, the historic buildings, as well as this site, are seen with taller buildings rising above and or beyond, and therefore the presence of the proposed bar building viewed in this context will not call attention to itself or detract from the exterior architectural features of the buildings within the historic district, nor will it be experienced as disruptive of the scale of the buildings in the historic district. That the fifth floor setback is visible from select locations functioning as a subordinate transitional architectural volume and otherwise provides a clean transition between the base and bar building. That when viewed from Peck Slip within the district looking west, the base and bar building will be seen primarily in context with other modern buildings and therefore will not detract from significant exterior architectural features of the historic buildings. That due to the significant setbacks and the strong reestablishment of the street wall, the bar building will be read as being disassociated from the base when viewed from Beekman Street looking west to Water Street looking both north and south and Fulton Street looking north, and will not detract from the historic buildings or call undue attention to the bar building. That looking east from Beekman and Pearl Streets to the East River and the Tin Building, the lower street wall will relate to the historic buildings to the south and east, and due to the significant setback, the bar portion will not detract from the historic buildings. That the new street wall on Pearl Street will complete the built character of the historic district, and the design, fenestration, materials, color, and details of the proposed building will reestablish and reinforce the boundary of the historic district, which is now broken and unclear due to the presence of the full city block parking lot. That given the topography, street plan, change in elevation as the land district slopes east from Pearl Street and the size of the buildings in the district, almost any new building will block views into the historic district from the west, including the 1991 approval, and that because of these factors, the bar portion has no material view impact on views into the district beyond what the smaller scale base portion already affects. That the taller street wall on Pearl Street will not detract from significant exterior architectural features of the historic buildings in the district,
because it is seen primarily within the context of new and non-historic buildings to the north and south. And that for these reasons, the proposed new development will enhance and strengthen the contribution of the site to the historic district and will not diminish the special architectural and historic character of the South Street Seaport Historic District.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, and Rich, will you call the vote?
Yes. Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Nay.
Commissioner Jefferson. I'm sorry, Commissioner Gustafson.
Nay.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
And Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
Okay, with 6 in favor and 2 opposed, the motion carries.
All right, so that is the motion for 250 Water Street. We will also make the motion for 89 South Street, the new building for the museum. We didn't discuss it this time because at the last public hearing of April 6th, there was a consensus of support and we didn't ask for any revisions, so nothing was presented today, but we'll go ahead and make that motion as well. So Commissioner Shamir Barron, would you read the motion for 89 South Street? Adi?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm just looking for it. Forgive me.
Okay, great.
In the matter of LPC 2104480, 89 South Street, aka 175 John Street, South Street Seaport Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the construction of a new building at this vacant lot will restore the continuity of the street walls to this block, that the height and scale of the new building will be consistent with the neighboring historic buildings on South Street and John Street, that the proposed contemporary design of the new building will reflect the layering of old buildings of various periods and styles with contemporary buildings and additions found throughout the historic district. The proposed copper cladding system will utilize a material traditionally found in maritime settings, including the lining of hulls of ships, and will be consistent with the use of material for cladding buildings, such as the tin building, as well as roofs, bulkheads, and other maritime structures historically found in the seaport. That the solid to void ratio, proportions, and rhythm of the fenestration at the street facades relate to that of many historic and modern buildings in the historic district. That the proposed window shutter system will recall the historic use of metal fire shutters on counting houses and store and loft buildings throughout the historic district. That the presence of arched openings on the ground floor will recall those historically found at Skirmerhorn Row and other buildings from past and present historic. That the open nature of the ground floor will reflect and respond to the waterfront setting, providing physical and visual access to the esplanade and piers, and has been designed to deal with future flooding events. That the proposed architectural concrete cladding at the ground floor and rooftop bulkhead will introduce a highly durable utilitarian material that is compatible with traditional masonry found at buildings and sidewalks and streets in the historic district. That the rooftop bulkheads and other features will be in keeping with the tradition of visible rooftop additions and other elements seen above the street wall facades on buildings in this historic district, and will not detract from or overwhelm the surrounding buildings or streetscapes. That the rear enclosure is evocative of the existing elevator and stair enclosure at the rear of the site, and that was previously approved by the community, and that it is appropriate in terms of contextual scale, simple form, and utilitarian appearance until and regardless of whether phase 2 is built. That the commercial buildings in this historic site, particularly those at the waterfront, historically employed different types of sizes of signs in large numbers, and therefore the proposed signage at the historic building, including the new banner sign at the corner entrance and other types of signs throughout, will not overwhelm or detract the buildings or the historic district. And the new building will enhance the special architectural and historic character of the South Street Seaport Historic District.
Thank you. Commissioner Chen, would you second that motion?
Second it.
Thank you. And Rich, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum. Commissioner Goldblum, did he step away?
He must have stepped away.
Okay.
His camera's off.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
and Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
Okay, with 7 in favor and 1 not present, the motion carries.
Okay, so that's approved as well. All right, thank you again for, to everybody, including you commissioners, for this. And we're now going to break for lunch, and we will break for 30 minutes. We'll come back at 1:30 and we will begin our public hearing agenda for the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
And commissioners, just turn your cameras and audio off. We'll ask all members of the public to exit the meeting and re-enter the meeting at 1:30.